Chapter 401. Separated by less than 10 feet, the speed of the 30 poison crossbow bolts was terrifying. The power attached to them was also shocking. No one could imagine that someone could dodge such a concentrated and sudden attack. Even if the person sitting at the table was a god, he would not be able to dodge. Thus, he did not dodge at all. Without seeing how he moved, a pair of chopsticks disappeared from the bamboo container on the table. He caught this pair of chopsticks firmly in his hands and then waved them freely in the air. It was as if he was catching a few delicacies from nothingness to eat. The tips of the weak bamboo chopsticks whistled through the air. It was as if it was not a pair of chopsticks, but an ancient divine weapon imbued with endless shinchi. Ding, 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 ding. It was like rain hitting a banana leaf. A series of densely packed sounds rang out. All of the crossbow bolts in the process of quickly shooting were gently pinched and pulled by the pair of chopsticks. In an impossible situation, all of them were pulled off by a few strands. They deviated from the imagined shooting trajectory by a few strands. They brushed past the bodies of the two people by the table and shot into the wooden boards of the Baliwa brothel, into the walls of the carriage. The crossbow bolts shot into the wood. Only the tails of the bolts trembled slightly. In an instant, the 30 crossbow bolts made it seem as if wild grass had grown on the floor, but they could not harm the person at all. The swordsmen of the 6th Bureau of the Overwatch Council looked at the scene in front of them and felt a chill surge into their hearts and take over their entire bodies. To be able to use only a pair of chopsticks to pull out such a fast crossbow bolt at such a short distance, this kind of speed, this kind of vision, this kind of power, the other party was not human. The other party was certainly not human. The Overwatch Council was the strongest organization in the Qin court. The officials of the Overwatch Council were the most determined people in the Qin Kingdom. But, in the end, they were still human. When they discovered that the enemy they faced seemed to have left the realm of human, they still felt fear and a kind of helplessness. The crossbow bolts of the 3rd Bureau only fired 3 times in a row. It was already too late to reload. Furthermore, the hands of all the swordsmen of the 6th Bureau were trembling. They looked incredulously at the table and the person beside it. It was as if they had forgotten their next step. As the group of crossbow bolts flew over, the 7 tiger guards were like 7 fierce tigers coming down the mountain. Under the cover of the crossbow bolts, they held long knives in their hands and turned into 7 streaks of snow-white light as they chopped toward the table. The light of the knife was still in the air when Fan Xian, who was behind the tiger guards, shouted, "Retreat." With this shout, he stood up and leaped into the air. With the order to retreat, the other 6 tiger guards, with the exception of Gauda, forcefully reversed their jinchi. In the air, they held their sabers horizontally across their chests in an extremely awkward manner. For feet above the table, they forcefully steadied their bodies. With the tip of their toes, they retreated as ordered. Gauda's kung fu was the strongest, and his reaction was the fastest. As the sharp edge of the mountain, he had already reached the table. Facing the mysterious person wearing the bamboo hat, he felt a slight chill in his heart, but he could no longer retreat. He could only let out a roar and circulate the jinchi in his body to its peak. He crossed his hands and slashed down with his saber. Gauda suddenly felt something tighten around his ankle, and his body was being pulled back by a vast amount of jinchi. However, the saber had already slashed down. The light of the knife sliced across the table. Because it was being dragged by the person behind him, it didn't cut the man in the bamboo hat. Instead, it cut the floor in front of the table. With a sharp sound, the thick solid wood floor was like thin paper. A large hole was cut open by the long knife in Gauda's hand. Dust rose slightly, and wood splinters flew everywhere. Through the hole, one could see the table on the 2nd floor of the Baliwa brothel. Just as Gauda struck, the man in the bamboo hat gently placed the pair of chopsticks in his hands on the table. It was only then that everyone noticed there was a sword beside the leg of the table. It was a very plain sword that did not give off a sharp light. It was wrapped in a thick coarse cloth. Then, the pair of chopsticks landed on the table. The ordinary sword suddenly gave off a bright light. With a clang, the hilt of the sword trembled without any wind. It jumped up excitedly and tore through the coarse cloth binding the scabbard. It forcefully pulled out half of the snow-white blade. A cold, murderous sword intent that did not seem to belong to the mortal world seeped out through that half of the sword. The sword intent entered the floorboards. The moment Gao Da's long knife touched the floorboards, it passed over. At the same time, the long knife broke open the large hole in the floorboards. Countless fine lines appeared along the knife's opening and quickly spread through it. There was no pattern to the lines, but they appeared so beautiful. There was not a shred of vitality in them. The patterns quickly invaded Gao Da's long saber. The tiger guard's long saber began to tremble uncontrollably. It was as though a pair of invisible hands were holding a diamond and carving it on the sharp and solid surface of the saber. Countless deep marks appeared on the surface of the saber. Gao Da's hands also began to tremble. Shocked and helpless, he pulled back his knife. The long knife blade split open like a weathered stone surface. The terrifying sword intent only reached the hilt of the knife, but the ripple went up. Gao Da gave a muffled grunt. His chest felt heavy, and he spat out a mouthful of blood. At the same time, there was a crack sound in his right wrist. The joint had been broken. It was only a matter of 3 breaths. For the man in the bamboo hat, the crossbow bolts and 7 tiger guard knives were as simple as raising and putting down a pair of chopsticks. The moment they met, the Overwatch Council suffered a crushing defeat. At this moment, the people protecting Fan Xian knew that what he had said earlier was not empty words. Given this extraordinary and divine realm, if the man in the bamboo hat wanted to kill the Imperial envoy, even if they all died, they would not be able to stop him. Extraordinary and divine, other than the 4 great grandmasters. Who else in the world had such a realm? Blood seeped out of the corner of Gao Da's mouth. His eyes were filled with shock. Half kneeling on the ground, he stared at the man in the bamboo hat not far away and said each word clearly, Sigu. As an internal servant of the Qin court, when had the tiger guards ever feared anyone? Gao Da's 3 words were said so weakly and hopelessly. In the hearts of the people, the 4 great grandmasters were no longer in the category of normal humans. All of the legends had almost become fairy tales. The feelings people had toward the 4 great grandmasters were only respect. Respect and fear. Other than that, there was nothing else. No one dared to attack the 4 great grandmasters. Even if it was someone who wanted to commit suicide, no one would choose this path. Gao Da stared at the man in the bamboo hat with wide eyes. He didn't understand why Sigu, who should be far away in Dongyi, would come to Jiangnan. It was only then that he felt his ankle being gently released. Earlier, if that person had not used a powerful force to grab his ankle and pull him back, Gao Da's knife would have chopped down and the man in the bamboo hat's sword intent rippled out. At this moment, what would have been shredded like cloth would not only be the long knife, but also his body. Only now did Gao Da feel a boundless fear. Unconsciously, he turned his head to look and saw Fan Xian's trembling right hand gently wiping it on his long robe. Fan Xian's hand was completely covered in cold sweat. It was a wet mess. He knew that if he had not seen the opportunity quickly and shouted quickly, these 7 tiger guards would have all died at the hands of the man in the bamboo hat. However, his expression remained calm. Although his pupils constricted slightly and his right hand, hidden behind his back, trembled slowly, he remained calm. Facing such an extraordinary and divine warrior, he had to be calm. The other party was a great grandmaster. Fan Xian was not an ordinary person. Ever since he was young, he had lived with a great grandmaster who was not ranked among the great grandmasters. He had been taught by Uncle Wu Zhu hand in hand. Thus, facing the man in the bamboo hat, he was not like everyone else in the building, so shocked that they couldn't even speak. However, he was still shocked. He even began to feel a bitterness in his mouth. Wu Zhu had once talked about power. Without a sliver of Jinqi, Wu Zhu had extraordinary power, but he was, after all, Fan Xian's closest family. When Fan Xian faced a great grandmaster for the first time today, he realized that under the other party's power, he didn't even have a sliver of a chance to retaliate. Fan Xian was a meticulous person who knew himself and others. He knew that, given his 9th level strength, even 10 of him could not defeat Uncle Wu Zhu. Using the same logic, 10 of him could not defeat the old man wearing the bamboo hat. What he had seen and felt earlier made Fan Xian believe even more in what Uncle Wu Zhu had once said. A first level can kill a ninth level as long as one's luck is good enough. But if you're facing those guys, don't talk about luck. The martial artists of the world were ranked from low to high, and those who reached the ninth level were the most powerful. The difference between each level was not insurmountable. Otherwise, Fan Xian would not have been able to slaughter everyone on Yalan Street, and he would not have been able to toy with Lang Tiao and Friar, he and Shangjing, Northern Qi. Once one broke past the ninth level and entered the realm of the celestial, like Ku He, that Baldy, or the old man in front of him, it was already a completely different realm. The difference in strength was like a bottomless ravine. It was impossible for any scheme to fill it. The top floor of Baoyue brothel was completely silent, but the noise below had already begun. Although Gao Da's strike had struck the air, it had startled countless people. The noise was unbearable. After a short pause, it quieted down. The guards and Shi Sang, guarding downstairs, were probably taking care of it. The man in the bamboo hat by the table was still silent. It was as if he was waiting for Fan Xian to make a decision. There was no light on his body, but in everyone's eyes, his thin clothes seemed to be plated with the splendor of the sky, making it hard for people to look directly at him. In comparison, Mr. Zhou, whom Fan Xian had always wanted to capture, sat timidly by the man in the bamboo hat. No one would notice him. A simple person, yet he covered up all the splendor between heaven and earth. Fan Xian's left hand still held the fan tightly. He looked at the man in the bamboo hat by the table and didn't speak for a moment. The top floor of Baoyue brothel was completely silent. It was deathly silent. The atmosphere was oppressive. The man in the bamboo hat looked at the calm Fan Xian and smiled slightly. Your reaction, your strength, seems to be a bit stronger than the rumors say. This was referring to when Gao Da's strike had come down. Fan Xian had reacted quickly and called back the 6 people. In a flash, he had shot up and used the coffin breaker to expand his right arm. He then used a small trick to forcefully grab Gao Da's ankle and drag Gao Da back, saving his life. For Fan Xian to be able to do all this in such a short moment could already be considered perfect. It was so much so that the man in the bamboo hat revealed a glimmer of admiration. Fan Xian did not reply to this question. Contrary to everyone's expectations, he slowly walked to the side of the railing and didn't look at the man in the bamboo hat again. All of the guards, including Gao Da, were stunned. The commissioner was very daring. Facing a great grandmaster that tens of thousands of people revered, he could be so natural and not look at him. Fan Xian walked to the side of the railing and faced the bustling Suzhou. The sparse air above Suzhou and the lingering smell of firecrackers lingered in the air. He took a deep breath. His expression changed slightly and immediately returned to normal. No one knew what he was thinking about. The sound of footsteps came from the stairs. Shi Chanli, whose face was full of shock, and Sang Wan, who had her mouth wide open and revealed worry in her gentleness, glanced at the table surrounded by the people of the Overwatch Council. They immediately turned their questioning gazes toward Fan Xian by the railing. Everyone go down. Fan Xian leaned against the railing and didn't turn his head as he gave the order in a cold voice. His hand gripped the fan tighter and tighter. The paper of the fan had warped slightly. He had probably made up his mind. Earlier, when the Tiger Guards had attacked, Fan Xian's shout had been able to make everyone retreat without regard for their lives. From this, it could be seen that none of the guards had any objections to his orders. They had carried them out very thoroughly. Now, when he gave the order for everyone to go down, everyone, including the Tiger Guards, used silence to express their opposition. A great grandmaster wanted to kill someone. At a time like this, no one dared to leave Fan Xian alone in the building. Fan Xian turned around and gazed at Gao Da with a slight smile. Perhaps my orders are no longer effective? Gao Da's heart skipped a beat. Looking at the familiar warm smile on the commissioner's face and the encouragement in it, his mind was a mess for a moment. He understood Fan Xian. Every time Fan Xian revealed that mesmerizing smile, it was often when he was truly angry. It was also when he had a card up his sleeve. Fan Xian continued, "Without my orders, no one is allowed to take one step into this building. Also, immediately evacuate the neighboring streets to prevent accidental injuries. Gouda let out a murky breath and wiped away the blood at the side of his lips. With a muffled grunt, he led everyone down the stairs. Along the way, he also pushed down Shi Changli, who was standing at the top of the stairs and unwilling to go down. When Fan Xian's personal guards came down the stairs, they saw a scene that they would remember deeply. It was a scene that made them incomparably terrified at the time. Step by step, Fan Xian slowly walked toward the table. He wore that strange smile on his face as the deformed fan in his hand opened again. As he fanned himself, he walked toward the table. His walk was very steady and free. In reality, walking from that table to this table was only a distance of 10 steps. However, these 10 steps made Fan Xian feel as if he had walked through the gates of hell. Strangely, the closer he got to the table the man in the bamboo hat was at, the calmer Fan Xian's heart became. Walking to the side of the table, Fan Xian stared into the eyes of the man in the bamboo hat. He looked directly at him rudely, as if he was not at all afraid that the man could kill him with a casual raise of his hand. The man in the bamboo hat also seemed to feel that the Jiangnan Road Imperial Envoy was rather daring and looked back at him with a slight smile. Gouda went down the stairs and immediately rearranged the defenses. At the same time, he followed the commissioner's orders and evacuated the neighboring citizens. He also ordered his subordinates to quickly go to the governor's manor to mobilize troops. Although he knew these methods had no effect on the powerful warrior in the building, he had done his best. Then, he went to the top floor of a building adjacent to Baiwa Brothel and flipped onto the eaves. Carefully hiding his figure, he watched every movement in Baiwa Brothel across the street. He was prepared to gamble his life at any moment. Gouda crouched behind the tile beast and looked at the top floor of Baiwa Brothel. He couldn't hear what the people inside were saying, but just looking at the contents was enough to shock him. The building was empty. There was only Fan Xian and the man in the bamboo hat facing each other. One was sitting by the table, and the other was standing by the table. As for Mr. Zhou, although he was not a person in Fan Xian's eyes, he was still an eyesore, so he waved his hand and indicated for Mr. Zhou to scram to the side. In reality, the Juanshang Conference's accountant, Mr. Zhou, was already quite frightened. He immediately left his seat obediently and squatted in the corner of the railing. There was an empty chair. Thus, Fan Xian lifted the front of his robe and sat down without a care in the world. At this moment, he was less than half a body's distance from the man in the bamboo hat. It was intimate, dangerous, and terrifying to the extreme. Gouda, who was watching from a distance, was almost scared to death. Fan Xian, who was in the building, still wore a faint smile. He put away the deformed paper fan in his left hand and slowly picked up the chopsticks the man in the bamboo hat had slammed on the table. He inserted them back into the bamboo tube. He did these 3 actions very carefully, slowly, and carefully. After the chopsticks were inserted, he sighed happily and clapped his hands as if he had completed a great task. The man in the bamboo hat did not kill him. This meant that everything could be discussed. Courageous. The man in the bamboo hat looked at Fan Xian with a slight smile. Among the younger generation, you are the most outstanding. If the great grandmaster's words got out, it would certainly establish Fan Xian's unbreakable position. However, Fan Xian did not feel slightly gratified because of these words. He smiled warmly and said, "So what? If you want to kill me, isn't it a matter of time?" The man in the bamboo hat calmly said, "What I said earlier still stands. You pull back the Black Knights, and I won't kill you." Fan Xian suddenly raised his head. A glimmer of mockery and disdain appeared in his eyes. In this world, it had been many years since someone dared to use this kind of gaze to look at the man in the bamboo hat. Even though the man in the bamboo hat was a top figure in the world, he still couldn't help but feel a glimmer of anger. "This is your request. A proper great grandmaster has fallen to such a level? You don't need this old face, but the Qin court still needs face." Fan Xian suddenly opened his mouth. Once he opened his mouth, countless sharp words spouted out. It was as if the person in front of him was not an unfathomable great grandmaster, but a subordinate he had pulled by the ear and lectured in the Overwatch Council. The man in the bamboo hat froze. It was clear that no one had lectured him like this before. For a moment, he couldn't react. Fan Xian suddenly slammed the table and stared at the man in the bamboo hat's strange face. Enunciating each word, he said, "Have you gone senile? This is a matter of the Juanshan Conference. What does it have to do with you that I moved the Black Knights to kill people? Do you have any filial sons or grandsons in the manor? You just charged up like this and put a knife to my neck, and I have to listen to you? Even if I did listen to you, what would happen in the future? Would your filial sons and grandsons not die? I'm afraid they will die even faster." Fan Xian's voice became sharp and mixed with boundless disdain and mockery. Pointing at the man in the bamboo hat's nose, he scolded, "Please, wake up. What year in year is it now? It has long since ceased to be the age where you can walk unhindered with a sword. Who do you think you are? Do you think you are a sword immortal? Isn't it a goddamn road to death?" The man in the bamboo hat looked at Fan Xian like he was looking at an idiot. Suddenly, he felt that he was also an idiot. He traveled the world and received the respect of tens of thousands of people. After an indeterminable amount of time, the man in the bamboo hat's complicated sigh rang out in the quiet top floor of Baiwa Brothel. "You are right. I should not have entered the world again. However, the people you want to kill and the people you want to capture are people I care about. What about that?" The man in the bamboo hat gently gripped the hilt of the sword by the table and flipped his hand to lift it. In a quiet voice, he said, "I will take the sword and leave Dong Mountain." The power of the sword gradually increased. It would be a lie to say that Fan Xian was not afraid. It would be even more false to say that he was not nervous. However, he used his valiant state of mind to control every muscle on his face. He stared fixedly at the man in the bamboo hat's face and said one thing. "You don't dare to kill me." A moment of silence. "Why wouldn't I dare to kill you?" "Because you're not that idiot Sigajian." Fan Xian gripped the broken fan on the table tightly again and said, "Of the 4 great grandmasters, as long as it is not that heartless idiot Sigajian, no one dares to kill me." The man in the bamboo hat's hand continued to hold the hilt of the sword steadily. Fan Xian believed that as long as the man pulled out this sword, his head would certainly be separated from his body. Thus, he forcefully suppressed the glimmer of fear in the depths of his heart and said, word by word, "That is why I do not understand why you would appear here. In my heart, you should be that noble man who rides half a broken boat and lightly sings to the world, free and at ease, his sleeves not stained by the drifting clouds. Not a martial man whose heart has been disturbed by matters and made such a stupid move." There was a strange light in the man's eyes. Fan Xian didn't know if his eyes were playing tricks on him, but he saw a glimmer of admiration in the man's eyes. The waves only bloomed for a moment, but compared to a millennial stone, it is not much different. "Sir is the same." Fan Xian stared fiercely at the man and said, "If you were Yi Luyuan, how would you dare to kill me?" To be continued. If you want to know what happened afterwards, please log on to www.cmfu.com. More chapters. Support the author. Support original reading. Chapter 402. The first and only time Fan Xian saw Yi Luyuan was when he was 12 years old. That year, he lay on the precipice with a strange light in his eyes. He gazed at the half of a lonely boat below the precipice, the tens of thousands of holes in the sand, the 2 exceptional people, and the battle between powerful warriors that disappeared with a touch. One was the great grandmaster of the Qing kingdom, Yi Luyuan, and the other was his uncle. The 12-year-old Fan Xian had just completed his tyrannical scroll, so his insight could not be considered exceptional. Thus, he only sighed in admiration at the power of the battle and did not stop to understand its essence. On the contrary, it was during these years that he would occasionally think back to that time and scene. Only then would he gradually find something beautiful, shocking, and learnable from his memories. The more he thought back, the more he admired Uncle Wu Zhu and Yi Luyuan's exceptional methods. Sometimes he would even feel that the figure of Yi Luyun riding the half of a lonely boat across the ocean still floated in his mind, and that ancient song still echoed in his ears. He had never thought that this great grandmaster of the Qing kingdom, a figure revered by tens of thousands of people, would be at the top of a brothel and become the person he had to face. Fan Xian was the person most afraid of death in this world, so he had once made a full understanding and analysis of the enemies he could face alone. He calculated and weighed his own strength and background. In this world, the person he feared the most should be Dongyi's Sigujian. The most unfathomable should be Northern Qi's Ku He. The most troublesome were, of course, the people in the royal palace. Although Sigujian was an idiot and could kill him without a care, everyone knew that idiots did not like to go out to unfamiliar places. The unfathomable ascetic master Ku He, who liked to eat human flesh, was finally beaten down to the mundane world after his beloved uncle Wu Zhu personally acted. A person who could be injured was not that scary. As for the people in the Qing royal palace, they were all related, so he temporarily did not have to consider them. The people Fan Xian truly feared were all great grandmaster level figures. From this, it could be seen that this person was either overly confident or somewhat arrogant. Speaking of which, given his strength and the blind uncle, he truly only had to consider these people. Of the 4 great grandmasters, only Fan Xian was not worried about Yi Luyun. On one hand, the memories of his youth were too deep. He always felt that this ancestor of the Yi family was quite a beautiful person who traveled the world all year round. He was a real person with a bright and cheerful temperament. He should not be involved in the boring struggles of the world. Secondly, the situation of the Yi family in Jingdo made Fan Xian's sharp eyes see clearly that Yi Luyun was a man of affection. Otherwise, the emperor would not have been able to maintain the balance between the two sides. The Yin fire of the Hanging Temple had burned the Yi family to the ground. Despite such a despicable method, Yi Luyun was able to endure and not return to the capital. Naturally, the happiness and safety of the Yi family and the continuation of the Yi family were more important than anything else. If Yi Luyun continued to stay in Jingdo and affect the balance of power, the emperor would not actually do anything to the Yi family. This was something that could not be announced, but it was a natural tacit understanding between the imperial power and Yi Luyun's extraordinary martial power. Thus, Fan Xian could not understand why Yi Luyun would make a move because of the Juanshan conference and would so decisively come in front of him and use his life to threaten him. If this was not stupid, then what was? Even if the Black Knights were to retreat this time, did the emperor not know of the connection between the Yi family and the Juanshan conference? Wasn't this balance still broken? If he came, then so be it. Fan Xian had accurately calculated this great grandmaster's weakness, which was why he dared to be so mocking and so rebellious in his dark and sour tone. If you were Yi Luyun, how would you dare to kill me? Fan Xian stared at the pair of eyes that were as calm as autumn water under the straw hat. It was as if he wanted to see the true purpose of this great grandmaster's sudden visit to Suzhou. In the depths of his heart, he had even prepared himself if Yi Luyun immediately asked, "Why wouldn't I dare to kill you?" He would immediately and coldly throw out the killing weapon he used to roam the Jianghu as an explanation. "If you kill me, Uncle Wu Zhu will naturally kill everyone in the Yi family." This was a simple truth. Yi Luyun would definitely believe it and would not accept it. So, back then, you hit on the cliff and peaked. Unexpectedly, Yi Luyun did not continue Fan Xian's words. He only slowly put the sword in his hand back into its sheath. Looking at his handsome face, he sighed. Fan Xian's heart jumped, but there was no expression on his face. He remained calm. "You don't understand?" Yi Luyun asked. Fan Xian truly didn't understand, so he nodded. The viciousness and confidence he had purposely pretended earlier immediately weakened a little. Yi Luyun smiled slightly and said, "If you weren't on that cliff, how could you have read those 2 lines? How could you have known that I was you? How could you have known that I knew you were him? How could you have known that I wouldn't dare to kill you?" It was very complicated. It sounded very complicated, so Fan Xian truly felt a bit dizzy. Fortunately, his enlightenment was a dozen years earlier than normal people. He had lived 2 lives, so his basic knowledge of logic was much more solid than others. He circled around in his head a few times and finally understood Yi Luoyun's words. What Yi Luoyun wanted to express was very simple. In this world, at least now, at least in Jiangnan, there were not many people who knew him. This meaning made Fan Xian feel incomparably shocked. Were there really not many people who knew the great Grandmaster of Qin Kingdom? He unconsciously let go of the paper fan he held tightly in his hand. A glimmer of mockery rose to the corners of his lips. Don't think that you can pretend to be my uncle by pretending to be cool. Don't think that you can pretend to be he's bald head by wearing a straw hat. Don't think that you can make others believe you're Sigu Jian by carrying a broken sword. You are Yi Luoyun. Regardless of whether or not I recognize you, in the end, you are Yi Luoyun. Sigu Jian's movements were the most important thing the Overwatch Council monitored. It was impossible for Yi Luoyun to pretend to be him. This was something Fan Xian did not understand. Did Yi Luoyun really want to shed all pretense of cordiality with the Emperor by doing this? He mockingly said, although Sigu Jian is indeed a bit of an idiot and has been made the scapegoat countless times by the Qin Kingdom, your act is not very particular. Who I am is not important. Yi Luoyun looked at Fan Xian coldly. I'm only here to remind you that too many people have died in Jiangnan when you went down there. Fan Xian narrowed his eyes and looked at one of the 4 most powerful people in the world without shrinking back. Slowly, he said, what goal in this world can be reached without people dying? What goal do you want to reach? I am an official. My responsibility is to protect the Emperor's interests and not let them be harmed in the slightest. A strange light flashed through Fan Xian's eyes. He smiled slightly and said, other than this, I have no other thoughts. Even if you die? No, I won't die. Yi Luoyun fell silent. A moment later, he said, your mother didn't seem to be this kind of person back then. Fan Xian was not surprised that the man would mention his mother, but his face was as cold as frost. Don't use my mother to pressure me, he said coldly. And speaking of killing, I'm sure you remember that my mother was no worse than me. I am talking about innate talent and nature. Yi Luoyun's voice suddenly sank. How can a person who likes to kill hold great power? The atmosphere in the building, which had slightly eased because of the reminiscing of the past, immediately became icy cold and tense again. When you were in Jingdo, there were those pitiful people who put in so much effort to worry about you. I won't talk about that for now. Yi Luoyun sat straight by the table. His entire person was as stubborn and unyielding as the pine tree on Dong Mountain. You went to Jiangnan. Many things happened in Jiangnan. How many people died because of your skillful hands? Fan Xian narrowed his eyes. He was incomparably angry. Lowering his voice, he said, could it be that if I didn't go to Jiangnan, the people in Jiangnan wouldn't have died? The bastards in the palace treasury would no longer be bastards, and the rotten rats in the Ming family would become rats? He smiled disdainfully and said, old man, earlier you said not to use my mother's name to pressure me. Now I will add another sentence. The name of righteousness has no effect on me. Yi Luoyun's expression did not change. It was impossible to tell whether he was happy or angry. He only quietly said, in the matter of killing Yuan Meng, you knocked out all the serving girls and servants in the manor. It appeared to be somewhat gentle, but these unconscious people were all captured by the Suzhou government and killed to silence them. He looked gently into Fan Xian's eyes and continued, when you left, you should have guessed that under the pressure of the Overwatch Council, those innocent people could only die. If you don't kill the innocent will die because of you. I only need to bear the responsibility I should bear. Fan Xian used the shameless words of a coach from his previous life lightly to reply, but a great shock surged in his heart. Of course, it was not because those innocent people had died because of him, although this made his heart dim slightly. This great shock came from Yi Luoyun's words. His words seemed to faintly reveal that he clearly knew the details of him entering the manor to kill people. Fan Xian stared into Yi Luoyun's eyes. He didn't know just how much this great grandmaster knew. If he knew that he had already learned the Sigu sword, then it would be terrible. This was one of Fan Xian's secrets. Once the Emperor and Jingdo found out, the entire Overwatch Council would be trampled to the ground because of the shadow and hanging temple matter. The other party could completely use this to threaten him. Looking at Yi Liuyun's expression, it seemed that he did not know the details. But why did Yi Liuyun not mention anything else but the unimportant Yuan Ming? A harsh light flashed through Fan Xian's eyes. He immediately recovered his calm and gave up on the thought of silencing him. Today's situation was different from the past. In the past, he was the knife, and the people were the meat. Today, he was the one struggling for his life on the chopping block. Wanting to kill the man in the bamboo hat in front of him, while Uncle Wu Zhu was recovering from his injuries, was an impossible task. Thus, Fan Xian slammed the table and roared, "To accomplish great things, one must not bother with trifles. If we don't strike like lightning and let Jiang be like before, how many people will the Ming family kill? How many more people will those pirates kill? Will you fill in the hole in the national treasury for me?" Without waiting for Yi Liuyun to reply, the tip of his disdainful finger stretched out again. Very boldly and rudely, he pointed at Yi Liuyun's nose and scolded, "And that Juanshang conference? Are they cleaner than me? What kind of person are you? How can you lower yourself to do things for them? You are a great grandmaster of the court. If you don't stand on my side, what right do you have to stand on that side?" The last sentence cleverly turned and went straight for the heart. Yi Liuyun furrowed his brows slightly and slowly said, "The Juanshang conference is not what you think it is. Of course, I understand. You are a great grandmaster high above, but in the end, you are still a person. You need to enjoy. Walk the world. Wandering the world is happy, but if you are exposed to the sun and rain, where is the feeling of being at ease? Every time you go to a province or a land, if there is someone who responds, serves, and worships you, naturally, you are happy. To be able to use the entire world to worship you, other than that Juanshang conference, who else can do it?" Yi Liuyun looked at him with a slight smile. It was as if he had not thought that this young man would be able to so easily see through his connection to the Juanshang conference. The matter had always been this simple. Kui was worshipped by Northern Qi, Sigajian was worshipped by Dongi, and the person in the royal palace was worshipped by the Qing kingdom. But what about Yi Liuyun? Walking the world without returning home, blowing in the wind on the ocean, caressing the pines on Dong Mountain, crossing rivers and lakes, all of these things needed someone to take care of and take care of. Even a great grandmaster had to eat and live in an inn, particularly someone of his status. Certainly, he did not like all the conventional flattery. Would he be willing to live in a secluded garden and interact with some lonely guests hidden in the wilderness? The garden required money. Entering the mountains to visit friends also required travel expenses. Traveling around the world was actually the most extravagant kind of life. You couldn't have a great grandmaster become a bandit and road tyrant. Fan Xian had not finished speaking when he smiled coldly and said, "But the relationship between your filial son and the Juanshang conference is not so simple. If you want to fish people out from under my hands, it is not so simple. The Juanshang conference is protecting these womanly hands for you. Are you planning to use these hands to hold up the sky for the Juanshang conference?" As he spoke, his gaze, intentionally or not, landed on Yi Liuyun's hands on the side of the table. Those hands are like white jade without a single wrinkle. They were not at all like the hands of an old man. Rather, they were like the hands of a girl who had never seen the sun and only knew how to embroider flowers and birds in her boudoir. This was the sign of Yi Liuyun abandoning his sword and mastery of San's home many years ago, when Yi Qingmei pushed Wu Zhu into Qing Kingdom's Jingdo. After the first battle between Wu Zhu and Yi Liuyun, it had not changed at all in all these years. Yi Liuyun listened to Fan Xian describe his hands as womanly. His eyes, which were as calm as autumn water, gradually began to boil. The key to negotiation was to grasp the other party's emotions, even if the other party was a high and mighty great grandmaster. Thus, when Fan Xian discovered that the true anger in Yi Liuyun's heart was about to explode, he immediately changed the topic and slowly said, "There should still be some time before the Black Knights act. If you truly care about your filial son and grandson in the garden, Shouldn't you give Mr. Zhou to me? Yi Luyan gazed at him with a not-quite-there smile. It was as if he was mocking him or looking at an ignorant child. At this time, you are willing to accept my conditions? Fan Xian lowered his eyelids slightly, but his heart gave a thump. He had originally thought that since Yi Luyan was not afraid of the hardship of sneaking the Juanshan Conference account master to Baiwa Brothel, he had the intention of using Mr. Zhou to exchange for the Yi family descendant in the Juanshan Conference. Did the other party not have this intention at all? I have never accepted any conditions under coercion. He raised his head and looked with great sincerity at Yi Luyan's simple face with his calm eyes. But this does not mean that I am not willing to come to some kind of agreement with an elder worthy of respect. Hearing this, Yi Luyan was finally moved. He sighed and said, as expected, shameless. Fan Xian smiled slightly and said, you use martial power to coerce people. I use human lives to coerce people. If we're talking about shamelessness, it's actually not too far off. Yi Luyan slowly stood up. Fan Xian's heart froze, but his expression was calm. He once again opened the pitiful fan that was already wet and deformed and waved it randomly. Yi Luyan looked at the fan in his hand. A glimmer of a smile flashed through his eyes. He could see the true nervousness in the depths of this young man's heart. Don't think that you understand everything and that you can control everything, Yi Luyan said. Otherwise, one day, you will die a very pitiful death. Otherwise, there will come a day when you will die a pitiful death. You are a smart person, but don't be too smart. You are smart, but don't be too smart. Yi Luyan lectured. You should know how to deal with the following matters. Yi Luyan slowly lowered his head and allowed the bamboo hat to cover his simple face. Holding the long sword tied in rough cloth, he walked to the side of the railing and turned his hand to grab Mr. Zhou by the collar. Fan Xian finally felt a glimmer of helplessness and bewilderment. If the great Yi Luyan had not come to deliver Count Zhou to him, why would he condescend to talk with him for so long? Yi Luyan turned his head. The mist in his eyes gradually grew. A faint but terrifying killing intent shocked Fan Xian's body. In the end, he slowly said, I am carrying a sword, not pretending to be that idiot Sigu Jian. Perhaps you have forgotten that I used a sword in the past. As he spoke, he slowly pulled out his sword. The snow-white edge did not reflect a glimmer of light. It was as if all of the light had been sucked into the steady and pure white palm. Fan Xian's eyelids twitched. He gathered his thoughts and desperately bit the tip of his tongue. The pain made him a little more awake. In a moment of life and death, all schemes and battles of wits were fake. He anxiously forced out all of the surging tyrannical Jinqi from the snowy mountain behind him. Channeling it to his fists, he struck forward. It struck the table. Accompanied by a strange scream, Fan Xian's entire body was shaken by his own domineering fists. His body twisted in the air like a dog in a sorry state. Frightened and miserable, he turned into a black line and rushed out of the building at a speed that was very admirable. Fan Xian swept onto the long street. His entire body floated in the air, but his eyes were filled with shock. Even at this moment, he could still feel the fierce and murderous sword intent chasing after him. It was as if it could cut him in half at any moment. He twisted his body, flicked his leg, opened his mouth, and spat out blood. Suddenly, he sped up again and somersaulted 3 times in the air. The tip of his foot kicked the green banner on the opposite building. Using the force of the soft bounce, he turned into a wisp of smoke and landed on the street. The 6 Tiger Guards and Overwatch Council swordsmen had long charged over and protected him firmly in the center. Layer upon layer, they fearlessly acted as a human shield. In an instant, Fan Xian felt that he was surrounded by people. He could not see what was happening outside. A glimmer of emotion flashed through him. His entire body once again entered its most sensitive state, ready to escape at any moment. However, there was a strange silence on Chong Street. Fan Xian did not move rashly. He hid behind the guards. After an indeterminable amount of time, he finally felt something was strange. He ordered his subordinates to open up a small crack. Yi Luyan was no longer in Baiwa Brothel. Following the crack that his nervous subordinates revealed, Fan Xian looked at the end of Suzhou's Chong Street. A cloth-clothed man wearing a straw hat was carrying a person and slowly walking toward the city gate. Although he was walking slowly, it seemed that each step of the other person covered dozens of feet as he gradually moved farther away. Fan Xian swallowed and moistened his burning throat. With a face full of confusion, he wormed his way out of the crowd and stood on Chong Street, staring in a daze at Yi Liuyun's back in the distance. God had already come down from the opposite building. Seeing the commissioner safe and sound, he was overjoyed. In a trembling voice, he asked, "Sir, are you all right?" Fan Xian hid his slightly trembling hands behind his back and forced himself to be calm. What could be wrong? As he spoke, he watched Yi Liuyun's back disappear into the city gate. At this moment, no one noticed that other than the opening Gouda had made, there were gradually new changes on the top floor of Baiwa Brothel. Beside the table that Fan Xian's fist had shattered, a hole suddenly appeared in the thick layer of red paint that was about half the height of a person on the thick pillar. The fan that Fan Xian had thrown down when he fled had disappeared. The hole in the paint split open even more like a wretched wound. The skin was flipping outwards, revealing the wood inside. However, the solid wood inside also slowly split open. The crack was so deep that the bottom couldn't be seen. It seemed to have already pierced through this thick pillar. It was not just this pillar. All of the wooden pillars, railings, carriage walls, decorations, and flower tables on the top floor of Baiwa Brothel began to show cracks along the height of a person. The cracks gradually spread, gradually stretched, and gradually connected into one. It was as if an ink line had been drawn along that area in an instant by the work of the uncanny. However, this line was not drawn with ink. It was drawn with a sword. With a crisp crack, the first to fall was the flower pot rack placed in the corner of the top floor of Baiwa Brothel. The flower pot landed on the floor and shattered into pieces. Then there was a loud crash. The long street had long been cleared. There was only Fan Xian and the dozens of trusted subordinates surrounding him. Hearing the sound, these people unconsciously raised their heads to look to the upper right. Everyone, including Fan Xian, was dumbstruck. Everyone's eyes were filled with shock and terror. Everyone's mouths were wide open, revealing teeth that were either perfectly white, full of tea stains, or missing a few teeth. They did not react at all when the dust and gravel that gradually filled the air blew into their mouths. Baiwa Brothel had collapsed. More accurately, it should be the top floor of Baiwa Brothel had collapsed. More accurately, half of the top floor of Baiwa Brothel at this moment was neatly and tidily collapsing according to a perfect design, sending dust flying into the air. The dust gradually settled. Everyone could see clearly that it was as if the top floor of Baiwa Brothel had been split open from the middle by a heavenly sword. The top had completely caved in, leaving only half of the neatly arranged wooden boards and decorations. The break was very neat and smooth. It truly was as if a large sword had split it open from the middle. Of course, at this moment, everyone knew that this had indeed been split open by a person using a sword. The feeling they had at the beginning resurfaced in everyone's hearts. This person was not a person. Fan Xian was the first person on the long street to close his mouth. He looked at the city gate that had long disappeared without a trace of people. He then turned his head to glance at his own half-broken building. He couldn't resist slapping his face heavily to convince himself that this was truly what had happened. When the people of the Overwatch Council and Tiger Guards came back to their senses, the gaze they turned to Fan Xian was somewhat strange. It was filled with shock and lingering fear, as well as confusion. They wondered how the commissioner had come out alive. This question, Fan Xian himself, was not very clear. Deng Ziyu. Fan Xian's voice was slightly raspy. The rims of his eyes were filled with an unhealthy red. As he coughed, he said, "Go over there." It was clear that Deng Ziyu was still in a half-dazed state. After Fan Xian angrily said it twice, he woke up and quickly made a sound of acknowledgement. Fan Xian called him in front of him and lowered his voice. If someone surrenders, then you must protect their life." Deng Ziyu was slightly startled. He raised his head to look at the commissioner. A glimmer of shame flashed through Fan Xian's eyes. Bring the person back. No, have the Black Knight send him directly back to Jingdo. He sighed in his heart. Don't get involved with me anymore. Let your elders play with their own matters. I can't endure this kind of mental torture anymore. Deng Ziyu accepted the order and turned his head to glance at the half-broken building. He couldn't resist swallowing. In a trembling voice, he asked, Sir, who exactly is that person? Fan Xian glared at him and said, Didn't Gao say it was Sigu Jian? It was no wonder Deng Ziyu was a trusted aide from the Second Bureau. He very straightforwardly retorted, The council reports clearly wrote that Sigu Jian is still in Dongyi. Fan Xian directly cut off his words and said angrily, Look at this broken building. The other party is a great grandmaster. Is his whereabouts something our crows can keep track of? Deng Ziyu didn't understand why Fan Xian was angry. He quickly accepted the order and found a horse to leave the city in a hurry to meet up with the Black Knights. After Deng Ziyu left, Fan Xian continued to stand on the long street, unwilling to return to Hua Garden. His subordinates and the Tiger Guards could not persuade him, so they could only stand with him. Fan Xian couldn't resist glancing at his half-broken building again. He wanted to say something, but he restrained himself. Before long, a fast horse from the Overwatch Council returned. Report, already out of the city gate. Another number of hours passed. Report, already past the evening pavilion. Finally, another rider arrived in a panic. Report, already past the 7 Li slope. The 7 Li slope was more than 7 Li from Suzhou. It was already on the official road back to Jingdo. It was a full 20 Li. Although no one dared to believe that the man in the bamboo hat was able to travel 20 Li in such a short time, once they thought of his identity, they somewhat understood. After confirming that the extraordinary warrior who had cut a building in half had left Suzhou, everyone let out a breath. Tiger Guard Gao wiped away the cold sweat on his forehead and moved closer to Fan Xian's side. In a quiet voice, he said, Sir, should we arrange for someone to stop him? Who can stop him? Gao thought for a moment and realized that he had indeed said something stupid. He quickly said, We have to quickly write a secret report and send it to Jingdo. Fan Xian furrowed his brows and said, I'm afraid there won't be enough time, but it has to be written. Deng Diwen. He called over another member of the Qinian unit. He was the original swordsman of the 6th Bureau responsible for protecting Xia Qifei a few days ago. When Deng Ziyu was not by his side, he was the one Fan Xian trusted the most. Fan Xian did not avoid Gao and straightforwardly said in a cold voice, Go notify the governor's yamen. Tomorrow, go to Ming Garden and turn in all of the Ming family's private soldiers. Gao listened to the side, and his heart trembled slightly. He had indeed not thought that after such a dangerous moment had passed, the first thing the commissioner would think of was how to use this matter to his own advantage. The imperial envoy being attacked was a major event. Presently, the people of Jiangnan were angry. Everyone would certainly think of the Ming family, using this matter to once again weaken the Ming family. At the same time, it could slightly reduce the people's resentment toward the old Ming matriarch's death. Gao truly admired the commissioner from the bottom of his heart. After confirming that Yi Luyuan had left Suzhou, Fan Xian's heart relaxed involuntarily. However, there was still a great doubt and confusion in his heart. However, it was impossible for him to talk to anyone about it. Looking again at the half-broken building beside him, he couldn't resist cursing with a gloomy expression. How much silver is this going to cost to repair? That old bastard. Hearing these words, everyone couldn't help but be shocked. Immediately, they froze and didn't dare to open their mouths. The long street was silent again. No one had thought that the commissioner would dare to curse a great grandmaster in the middle of the street. Fan Xian looked at everyone's strange expressions, and a wave of anger surged up for no reason. He opened his mouth and cursed loudly. This is my building. Someone else is tearing it down, and I can't even curse? That's an old bastard. Gao Da's heart was complicated. He wanted to go cover the commissioner's mouth, but he didn't have the courage. He couldn't help but admire the commissioner even more. He was indeed a courageous and exceptional figure. Earlier, Fan Xian had dealt with it alone upstairs, which had already made these subordinates indescribably amazed. Later, he was able to survive and successfully make the great Grandmaster float away. Everyone admired the commissioner even more to the bone. Of course, what they admired the most was that Fan Xian still dared to curse in the middle of the street after the matter. Under everyone's admiring gazes, Fan Xian mumbled something, but no one heard it clearly. They only saw his body go limp, and he was about to fall down in the middle of the long street. A patch of flowers floated past. A girl supported Fan Xian's body. Everyone recognized this person and knew she was the commissioner's confidant, so they were not nervous. They were just a bit worried. It looked like the commissioner had still suffered internal injuries in the face of an extraordinary and saintly great grandmaster. Everyone hurriedly followed the young man and woman in front of them toward Hua Garden. It was only at this time that the governor's manor's soldiers arrived late. Fan Xian tilted his body slightly and fell into the girl's embrace. Smelling the faint fragrance, he couldn't resist grumbling. "He's already gone before you dared to come out." An apologetic expression flashed across Haitong's face. "I can't beat him." Fan Xian couldn't resist rolling his eyes. "Who can beat this kind of monster?" Haitang asked worriedly. "You suffered internal injuries?" "No," Fan Xian replied seriously. "I pretended for too long upstairs. Actually, my legs have long gone limp from fear." The last chapter was actually written in a hurry. Many places were rather rough, such as a lot of typos, so I was embarrassed to narcissistically admire myself at the end of the chapter. Haha, this was in response to a cute question from a book friend. Then, there was Yi Luyun coming to Suzhou. The logical problem of coming and then leaving is established, but the specific reason cannot be explained. The inside story is detailed in the next volume, Pleasure Before the Palace. P.S. The South was cold, and the whole family caught a cold. One brother's parents went south for the new year and ended up stuck on the Hunan Railway. Another brother wanted to go north for the new year, but the train stopped running, so he could only be alone. What is this? Fortunately, there is a sky full of white snow to edify. I wish everyone good health. Photoshop again. Occasionally I think of something. Now that the story is good, why is there less strangeness in the words? I want to find the part that makes me feel good. Photoshop again. Today, the word count seems to have increased. Originally, there were only 8,900 words. Photoshop, now it's over 9,000 words. Tomorrow, I'll write a chapter to make up for it. I'm too lazy to change. To be continued. If you want to know what happens next, please log on to www.cmfu.com. More chapters. Support the author. Support original reading. Chapter 403. In front of a valley about 20 li from Suzhou City, a manor without any special features was quietly waiting for dusk to descend. With the arrival of dusk, the night gradually fell. 400 black horses held coins in their mouths and cloths under their hooves as they quietly surrounded the manor like the grim reaper of the night. What followed was a bloody battle. The black knights outside the garden shot fire arrows into the garden, and the people inside were lighting their own fires. Smoke signals rose, lives were lost, and the garden was destroyed. The Black Knights were the 5th Bureau of the Overwatch Council. It was the most powerful department, but there was no one in the Yamen. They always waited outside Jingdo for Chun Pingping's transfer. It was not until later that the Overwatch Council gained a young commissioner that the Black Knights split into two. 1,000 followed Fan Xian. From this, one could see how much Chun Pingping valued Fan Xian. Last year, when Fan Xian went on a diplomatic mission to northern Qi, the Black Knights had escorted him all the way to the border. Furthermore, at Wudu, they had successfully annihilated the army that Shang Shanhu had sent to rescue Xiao In. The Black Knights who had been on standby in Jiangbei finally had a place to use their skills today. However, the deputy commander of the Black Knights, who was riding at the foot of the mountain, did not have any excited expression. To them, this was just a simple task. The commander of these 400 Black Knights was the deputy commander of the 5th Bureau, surnamed Jing Wuming. Jiang Jing sat steadily on his horse and looked at the raging fire in the garden. His right hand slowly pressed against his face and took off the black mask that covered his face, revealing a pale face and a pair of cold and emotionless eyes under the mask. The mission the commissioner had given them had been completed. However, they had not expected that this unremarkable garden would have such a powerful martial force that even the Black Knights had suffered some damage. The most terrifying thing was that everyone in the garden seemed to know that they had only one path to death. They fought with all their might. Not a single person surrendered. Jiang Jing did not know who was in the garden. He was only carrying out the commissioner's orders. Furthermore, the people in the garden had set fire themselves. Some evidence that could not see the light of day had probably long been destroyed. He grabbed the rope, and the horse's hooves clattered as it slowly approached the burning garden. The cavalrymen under him were treating the wounded and cleaning up the scene. His eyes were filled with killing intent as he watched all of this. Suddenly, his eyelids twitched. The 5 riders burst out of the fire, flickering with black flames, as if they were the ghost death cavalry of the netherworld. Other than the knights in black armor, there were also a few people who were tied up like rice dumplings. Jing Jing pressed his right hand on his face again and put on the black mask again before the 5 riders arrived. His thin lips slightly opened and a cold voice rang out. He was a little surprised alive. The 5 riders rode to his side and reported, "These 5 people are hiding in the well and have surrendered." Even though Jiang Jing was cold, there was an additional unexpected joy in his heart. The corners of his lips twitched and revealed a cold smile. The commissioner should be happy. With this garden's desperate resistance and the plan to burn indiscriminately, it was indeed not easy to capture them alive. Jiang Jing looked at the 5 captives tied up on the horse and felt a little strange in his heart. Back to Suzhou. The surface of the black mask reflected the golden flames. It looked extraordinarily colorful and had a chilling aura. Under the mask, Jiang Jing coldly gave the order. Outside the garden, the neighing of horses tore through the silence of the dark night in the valley. The horses' hooves clattered slightly before they formed up again. In unison, they became 3 black torrents and circled around the burning manor. They swept diagonally across the road at the foot of the mountain and disappeared into the night. Not long after the Black Knights left the mountain like ghosts and entered the plains, they ran into Deng Ziyu and his group, who had come to receive orders and receive the commissioner's latest order. Jiang Jing was silent for a moment and arranged for a small group of riders to escort the captives to Jingdou. The remaining hundreds of night death gods did not enter the city. Instead, they quietly found a place to cross the river and returned to the camp in Jiangbei. After Deng Ziyu reported back to Hua Garden, Fan Xian only nodded his head to indicate he understood. In his study, he finished writing a secret memorial to the emperor and handed it to a subordinate in the council to quickly send it back to Jingdou. Then, he went alone to the main hall of Hua Garden. Bright lanterns hung high in the main hall, illuminating it brightly. In particular, the chest of snowflake silver was lying quietly in the chest, reflecting an alluring light. Fan Xian glanced at the chest of silver and shook his head. Sighing, he sat on a chair beside the chest and thought to himself that silver was indeed very useful. 138,880 taels of silver were neatly stacked up in the chest. Fan Xian couldn't resist glancing at it again and sighed again. In the end, he gave up on the thought in his heart. Facing Yi Luyun, that feeling of helplessness and powerlessness actually made Fan Xian angry. Of course, he did not feel any unnecessary self-pity or humiliation. Not being able to defeat a great grandmaster was a matter of justice. However, he knew that no matter how his life developed in the future, there would come a day when he would face a great grandmaster. Even if it wasn't Yi Luyun, Sigu Jian, or that person in the palace, he would still have to face them head-on. However, Yi Luyun had cut the building in half with one strike and that powerful aura that filled the heaven and earth. It all made Fan Xian clearly realize that the current him was completely helpless against someone of the great grandmaster level. It was the same logic as the Ming family being completely helpless against him. A great grandmaster was too powerful, so powerful that he could ignore the encirclement of normal martial power. No wonder the emperor had always been lukewarm toward the Yi family. No wonder he was able to support that pair of orphans and widows. No wonder an idiot like Siga could protect Dongyi. Fan Xian thought to himself and sighed. He began to miss his dear Uncle Wu Zhu. Immediately, he overturned his thoughts. He only had one life. He couldn't always rely on his uncle to resolve his worries and remove difficulties. Particularly, Wu Zhu couldn't have any advantage when facing these great grandmasters. From the depths of his heart, Fan Xian didn't want Uncle Wu Zhu to take risks. Then, how could he kill a great grandmaster? Under the company of a chest of silver and a hall full of lights, Fan Xian sank into deep thought. In an instant, he had already simulated many scenarios and themes in his mind. What kind of place of certain death and certain killing opportunity would he have to create in order to kill a great grandmaster on spot? His palm unconsciously patted the chest. Suddenly, he stood up and yelled in a loud voice, "Meeting! Meeting!" As he yelled, he walked toward the back of the hall. The commissioner had called for a meeting, so no one dared to slight it. The upper-level officials the Overwatch Council had placed in Hua Garden, all of the members of the Qinian unit, and the 7 Tiger Guards all gathered in the conference hall. Fan Xian's but had just landed on the chair when he couldn't resist laughing and scolding. Help Sir Lin back to play. He glared at the third prince, who had come to watch the spectacle, and to Bao, who had run in at some point and had the serving girls help these two back. Glancing at the number of people present, he shook his head and said, "Invite Shi Chanli and Sang Wen over as well." The subordinate accepted the order and left. In a moment, Shi Chanli and Sang Wen also arrived in the hall. Shi Chanli often helped his teacher handle some affairs, so he was not unfamiliar with this kind of meeting situation. On the contrary, Sang Wen's gentle face was filled with hesitation and shock. She thought the imperial envoy was discussing the important matters of court. What was she as singer doing here? The theme of today's meeting is very simple. Everyone, open your minds. If you have any strange ideas, be bold and say them. Fan Xian rubbed his temples and said with a headache, "I really can't think of anything by myself." Tiger Guard Gauda glanced at him and saw the commissioner's worry, but he didn't know what he was worried about. In a low voice, he said, "Sir, please give your orders." "Brainstorm, brainstorm, brainstorm." Fan Xian forced a smile and said, "Everyone, come and I'll come up with ideas." Everyone looked at him curiously, not knowing what ideas he wanted them to come up with. Fan Xian said very seriously, "What do you think it takes to kill a great grandmaster?" The discussion hall immediately became silent. All the subordinates looked at each other. Sang Wen was so shocked that she pressed her slightly wide lips together into a small cherry mouth. Shi Chanli had a strong urge to turn and leave. What was this discussion about? How could one kill a great grandmaster? If someone could actually think of a way, then the first thing the Qin Kingdom and Northern Xi would do was to send people to kill Siga Jian according to the law. Then, the two countries would first divide the wealth of Dongyi with the noble women of the vassal states. Of all the people in the hall, Deng Ziyu's position was higher and he was closer to Fan Xian. Looking at his expression and the strange expressions of his colleagues, he carefully said, "Sir, were you injured by the sword Qi?" Fan Xian immediately cursed angrily. "I didn't injure my brain." He didn't care how shocked his subordinates were. In any case, he forced everyone to come up with ideas. For a moment, the people in the discussion hall were forced into a corner. They could only pick some absurd ideas to come up with. As they came up with ideas, everyone felt uneasy. A great grandmaster was revered by tens of thousands of people. He was a godlike figure. Yet, they had to follow the commissioner's orders and think of how to harm him. However, the Overwatch Council was, in the end, a sinister yamen flowing with black water. After saying a few words, everyone let go of their courage and felt a strange sense of pleasure. Meeting to discuss how to kill a great grandmaster. Even if they couldn't kill him, just thinking about it was exciting enough. Someone opened the discussion by saying that they could not defeat a great grandmaster. If they wanted to defeat him, first of all, they had to weaken his power and increase their own. They suggested using poison. Someone immediately retorted that a great grandmaster's martial power had reached perfection. Once poison entered the body, it would immediately turn into a puddle of snow water and be useless. Someone suggested that they should choose a medicine that stimulated the body's inherent qualities. It was not an external poison, but it could move the body's emotions or energy in a short time. Naturally, it would weaken afterward. Fan Xian coldly interrupted, "That's an aphrodisiac." Someone else said that if one wanted to take a person's life, one had to first disturb their will. If one wanted to kill someone, one had to first make them crazy. They should construct some special scene to intensify the great grandmaster's emotions and make his mind sink into confusion. Fan Xian nodded with great approval. In his heart, he was cursing Ouyang Feng's craziness. Deng Ziyu thought for a while and suddenly slapped the table. In reality, it's not difficult. As long as we think of a way to set up a trap so that the opponent can't escape easily, we can use the 6th Bureau's crossbow camps to surround him and release them in order without stopping or resting. We can exhaust his true strength. Even if we have to use tens of thousands of crossbow arrows, we have to weaken the opponent's body and chi. Then, we can use the 5th Bureau's Black Knights to charge. After all, a great grandmaster is not a god. Fan Xian looked at him and asked, "How many people do you think will die with this plan of yours?" Deng Ziyu calculated and reported, "The 6th Bureau's crossbow camps will probably all be destroyed. There should still be 10% of the Black Knights alive." Fan Xian shook his head and said, "I want to kill people, not send my own people to their deaths." Deng Ziyu excitedly said, "If we can actually succeed, it doesn't matter how many people die." Fan Xian raised his brows and smiled coldly. "Then, how can you make the opponent not move and not escape? Just stand there and let you shoot and rush as you please?" "He's not a scarecrow." Deng Ziyu was silent. The brainstorming continued. The ideas everyone came up with became increasingly preposterous and nonsensical. Some people suggested becoming kidnappers, others suggested playing with an avalanche, and others suggested doing something to the latrine. Then, the rebuttals also arrived. First, Siga Jian did not have any family. His family had all been killed by him. At the same time, Donnie never saw snow all year round. As for the last suggestion, everyone snorted disdainfully and couldn't be bothered with it. Fan Xian watched this scene with cold eyes and felt slightly at ease. This seemingly preposterous discussion was actually to lessen the shock in his subordinates' hearts at the Baoyue brothel incident. Yi Liuyun's sudden appearance had, without question, created a powerful shadow in their hearts. Even Gao Da's face had difficulty showing its original determination. Taking such a group of subordinates to do things, he couldn't allow them to be immersed in such inappropriate emotions. That was why Fan Xian would openly ask everyone to discuss how to kill a great grandmaster. After a few rounds of discussion, it was clear that the fear suppressed in the depths of everyone's hearts had lessened greatly. Other than excitement, it could be said that they had swept away the shock they had received during the day. The effect was good. Of course, the people in the discussion room did indeed bring up some effective methods. No one knew if Fan Xian would use them in the future. As for his subordinates, taking Sigu Jian as their imaginary enemy, it was somewhat unexpected to Fan Xian. The people of the Qin Kingdom would never think of dealing with Yi Luyan, because they were in the honeymoon period with Northern Qi, because of Fan Xian's relationship with Haidang, and because the young lady of the Fan family had now become Master Ku, He's last disciple. The subordinates would not blindly discuss how to kill Ku He in front of the commissioner. It was that pitiful Sigu Jian again. The discussion lasted until the candles were extinguished. After everyone dispersed, they continued to whisper among themselves in the garden. They were excited by the commissioner's daring action and couldn't help themselves. Fan Xian shook his head and called Sangwen over. Baoyue brothel is half destroyed. It will take at least half a month to repair. What arrangements have been made for the girls in the brothel? When they first went to evacuate the neighborhood, the guests in Baiwa brothel had all left. The girls had also been evacuated to a safe area. It was not until now that Fan Xian had the leisure to worry about his brothel business. Sangwon replied respectfully and cautiously, "The girls have been temporarily placed in other brothels. The bosses are very easy to talk to and have all taken them. However, staying in other brothels for a long time is not a good thing." Fan Xian nodded. In all of Suzhou, there was no one who didn't look at his face. Those brothel bosses were probably more than happy to help take in their own girls. "Then, let Sure Chanli take the lead on the matter of recultivation. You can rest for a while." Fan Xian suddenly thought of something and raised his brows. A glimmer of ruthlessness appeared on his handsome face. "Put away all of the detailed bills. When I return to the capital next year, I will find someone to collect on them." Sangwon made a sound of acknowledgement. Fan Xian asked, "You don't have to live outside. Hua Garden is big. Spend a few days with Cici and help look after my brother-in-law." Sangwon smiled innocently and covered her mouth, not saying anything. "What is it?" Miss Haidang also said the same thing, Sangwon said with a light laugh. "Those two girls have also been brought to the garden." Fan Xian was startled. Only now did he understand that she was talking about the two leading ladies of Baiwa brothel, Liang Diandian and Ma Sufa. He couldn't help but be surprised at Haitong's meticulousness. Liang Diandian had not officially opened her cards, so it was indeed not appropriate for her to live in another brothel. As for Ma Suasoa, that was the great prince's mistress. He had to take good care of her. To be continued. If you want to know what happened next, please log on to www.cmfu.com. More chapters. Support the author. Support original reading. However, Liang Diandian had not personally seen the inside story of the brothel, so her description of Fan Xian, his defeat in the face of danger, and his extraordinary courage was a bit exaggerated. She successfully created the image of a perfect young man that the kingdom of Qing should not have. The eyes of the girls in the garden all began to heat up and become bashful. They loved the imperial envoy to death, but they couldn't open their mouths. They didn't dare. Even Ma Suasawa tilted her head slightly to look in front of the pool. A strange expression appeared in her eyes. Fan Xian swallowed. He knew that if he continued to watch, he would make many mistakes in life. Those girls were still growing, but sister-in-law and Liang Diandian were truly natural seductive creatures. Their eyebrows were like black, their lips like vermilion, and their eyes were full of spirit. If one looked at them and lost their spirit, how could one look again? He was just about to clear his throat to remind everyone when he heard a girl in the garden say something unintentionally. He closed his mouth and stood quietly with his back to the light. Sangwon glanced at him with confusion. She didn't know what had happened. The little girl was only 12 or 13. She opened her eyes wide and said innocently, "Sisters, why haven't we seen the mistress?" Because of the current situation, Fan Xian's group had lived in Hua Garden for a few months and hadn't moved to Hangzhou. During these days, Cici had brought these little girls to live in the garden. These girls had long known the name and identity of their benefactor. To be able to become the imperial envoy's servant girl made them feel very lucky. However, it had been so long, yet they hadn't seen the mistress. This made them feel a bit strange. Liang Diandian listened to these words and paused slightly. She didn't say anything. These little girls didn't know. She was from Jingdou, so she knew about the explosive marriage between Fan and Lin. The young lady of the Lin family was the illegitimate daughter of the eldest princess. This matter had gradually changed from a secret known only to the nobility of the court to a rumor circulating among the people. Although it had not been proven, not many people didn't believe it. Everyone under heaven knew that Sir Fan Jr. and Xinyang had long become like fire and water. This matter, a girl spat and scolded. "What right do we have to discuss the matters of the master's family? If Cici hears it, be careful of your mouth." The girl in front of her laughed foolishly and said, "Hee. Actually, she just wanted to see what kind of fairy-like appearance the mistress is worthy of a young master." In their hearts, Fan Xian was a top-notch figure. Naturally, they were curious about what kind of person Lin Warner was like. I hear this mistress is also a virtuous young lady from a noble family. Liang Diandian suddenly rolled her eyes and smiled sweetly. However, I hear her appearance isn't all that outstanding. I'm afraid she can't even compare to Cece. That's true. How many people can be worthy of the young master? Hee, I really don't know in the future. Right? Isn't there a girl living in our garden? It's just that we haven't seen her often. What a big attitude. Liang Diandian gave a not quite there smile and said, I hear she is also Sir's confidant. However, she's not Cece, she's an old man. She has no name or status. Shut up. The servant girl who vaguely knew Haitang's identity couldn't scold Liang Diandian. She could only grab the girl and quickly scold. You really want to die? How could such a noble person put on airs for you to see? Fan Xian couldn't listen to it anymore. He coughed and walked into the light. The servant girls jumped in fright and rose one after another. Restraining their spirits and breathing, they bowed in unison toward Fan Xian and said gently, Greetings, young master. The way they were addressed in Hua Garden was still according to the rules of the courtyards in Jingdou. Fan Xian looked at these girls and shook his head. He thought to himself that the discussion in his own garden was already like this. He didn't know how unbearable the rumors outside would be. However, he was also an open-minded person and couldn't be bothered to care about what other people silently criticized. Slowly, he said, It's late. Go to sleep. The servant girls stuck out their tongues and bowed again. They quickly tidied up their clothes and quietly returned to their own rooms. Only Liang Diandian and Ma Suo were called down by Fan Xian. Fan Xian stared at Liang Diandian's beautiful and naturally charming face and didn't speak for a moment. Liang Diandian was slightly happy, but she didn't show it on her face. On the contrary, she purposely appeared weak and timidly lowered her head, showing her most beautiful side. Back in the year of the marriage between Fan and Lin in Jingdou, according to the rumors in the marketplace, Fan Xian truly loved his sick wife dearly. From this, one could tell that Sir Fan Jr. valued relationships. In the boudoir, Fan Xian was the dream lover of all the girls. Although Liang Diandian had grown up on a pleasure boat, she was no exception. However, she had some uncomforting scheming and considerations. Liang Diandian was very confident in her appearance. She thought to herself that the young mistress was not as beautiful as her, yet she was able to receive Sir Fan Jr.'s love. This man probably liked to take pity on others and had purposely put on such an appearance. Furthermore, after the Suzhou branch of Baiwa Brothel had opened, Sir Fan Jr. had not allowed her to receive guests. Presumably, he was also interested in her. Feeling Fan Xian's unmoving gaze, Liang Diandian's happiness gradually grew. She lowered her head shyly and didn't say a word. Standing behind Fan Xian, Sangwon watched this scene. A disgusted smile rose to the corners of her lips. Fan Xian suddenly opened his mouth and said, Everyone has the right to live better, so I don't dislike your way of thinking. Liang Diandian raised her head in shock and met Fan Xian's emotionless gaze. Only now did she know she had misunderstood. Her heart jumped. Fan Xian continued coldly, However, I don't like it. Liang Diandian was overwhelmed with shame and didn't dare to say anything. No one is born to serve others. If you don't want to work in Baiwa Brothel, have shopkeeper Sang turn you into a Qing household. Once you've earned back the silver, you will be allowed to leave. Fan Xian stared at her beautiful face and said, Sangwon, pack her luggage and find another place to live. Sangwon was startled. She had not expected the commissioner to be so heartless. However, she didn't say anything. She brought Liang Diandian, whose eyes were glistening with tears, into the manor to pack. At this moment, there was only Fan Xian and Ma Suo left in the garden. Ma Suo suddenly opened her mouth and said in a quiet voice, Sir, is Suo also going out of the manor to avoid polluting the peace of this garden? The corners of Fan Xian's mouth twitched slightly, and he laughed bitterly. Looking at the Hu tribe princess's eyes that were like the blue sea, her straight nose, and her deep and beautiful face, he quietly said, Stay here. Don't talk too much. Don't ask too much. I like you very much. If there is a chance in the future, I will help you." Masuasawa was slightly surprised and raised her head to look at Fan Xian. It was as if she hadn't thought that he would see everything so clearly and reveal such intentions. She couldn't help but gratefully say, "Thank you, sir." Fan Xian calmly said, "No need to thank me. I have always liked to stand on ice and see the world." Returning to the room, Cece had already prepared hot water. After washing his face, he dipped his feet into the hot water. Fan Xian sighed with satisfaction and immediately closed his eyes. He began to follow the method Haidang had taught him, using small drops to repair the meridians that had been injured by Yi Liuyun's sword qi. Ever since he was young, his method of cultivation was different from that of others. The proper process of meditation was as easy as napping for him. After an indeterminable amount of time, his eyelids opened slightly and Junqi circulated through his entire body. He found that he was already much more comfortable. He also found that the room was quiet and couldn't help feeling a little strange. Looking to the side, he found that Cece had already fallen asleep on the desk. It was probably because she had been worried for too long during the day and waited for too long at night that the girl was unbearably sleepy. Fan Xian smiled and didn't wake her up. He grabbed a towel and wiped the water off his feet. Gently, he walked behind her and placed his robe on her body, worried that she would catch a cold. He stood behind Cece for a while and looked at the strands of messy hair at the back of the girl's spotlessly white neck. He couldn't help but sigh. He thought of the time when he and Cece were copying books in Danzhou. How relaxed, happy, and free it was. There were no outside matters to worry about. There was only a bean lantern, an inkstone, a bald brush, and a delicate attendant. The two of them sat side by side, copying the story of the stone. Although they didn't have any glyphs, those dots of graceful handwriting were truly fragrant. He thought for a bit, and then gently pressed his right hand against the back of Cece's neck and helped her rub it. He applied some Jinqi to a few acupuncture points to help her adjust her breathing and sleep. Only then did he carefully lift her up and put her on the bed. Pulling the thin blanket over her, he finally felt reassured and patted her face. He then picked up his shoes and walked out of the room. The moment he closed the door, he seemed to see the soundly sleeping Cece. A safe and satisfied smile appeared on his face. Wearing a robe, pulling on his shoes, and shrugging his shoulders, Fan Xian strolled through Hua Garden without a care for his image. It was as if he wanted to borrow the night breeze to blow away the depression in the depths of his heart. Although the Hua Garden that the salt merchant Yang Jimei had given him was beautiful, it was a pity that it could not calm his heart. There were too many things weighing down on his heart. Uncle Wu Zhu was not by his side, and Wanner was not by his side. He truly had no place to complain, no place to discuss, and no place to vent. No one knew why he had done things in such a hurry in Jiangnan, and why he did not care about anything in order to turn things around, including his friends, his subordinates, his enemies, and his family. Everyone seemed to have an erroneous judgment toward Fan Xian. This kind of judgment was what made Fan Xian most angry. Everyone thought that Fan Xian could be ruthless when it came to the struggle for power. Thus, intentionally or unintentionally, everyone had forgotten the countless threads of connection between him and the eldest princess. They only waited to see how he would stomp Xinyang into the ground. They had not thought that not only would Fan Xian stomp, but he would stomp beautifully. Fan Xian did not have a shred of affection for the eldest princess, but his affection for Wanner was deeply rooted. After all, Fleur was the eldest princess' own daughter. Everyone had forgotten this point. Everyone had purposely forgotten this point. Fan Xian was very angry and gloomy. Although he had already secretly made arrangements, he was still angry. If one day the eldest princess truly died at his hands, what would happen to Wanner? Nowhere to complain, nowhere to complain. Fan Xian could not stop his steps. It was like this in officialdom in Jianghu, and it was also like this in Hua Garden. He strode around the quiet pond and walked through the long and desolate corridor. Purely subconsciously, he followed that familiar stone path and walked to the quiet study at the back of Hua Garden. He raised his head to look at the door and couldn't resist smiling self-mockingly. How had he come here again? Ensure Shua Xianu. Wang Xinji lived in Shanin. Because he missed Priest Dian, he braved the snow and took a boat through the night to visit. As the morning light shone brightly, the king arrived in front of the Dai family's door. Without knocking, he turned and left. The servant put down the large chair. The king said, "I came in high spirits and left when my spirits are exhausted. Why should I see Dian?" Fan Xian did not have this kind of awkward scholarly bearing. He also did not like to play tacit. He was even more ashamed of teacher Su and Fan Xian's affectation. Since he had come, he knew that he was already used to coming to find her to discuss things when he faced true difficulties in his state of mind. He wanted to find a way, at least a way to calm his heart. Thus, he walked up the stone steps and gently pushed the door under the moon. The study was not bolted. During this half-year, she had lived there, quietly, alone in a secluded part of Hua Garden. Haidang had long woken up when he arrived at the door. She had already sat up on the bed. She wore a flowery robe and sat at the head of the bed, looking at him with a not-quite-there smile. There was no light in the study. Only the faint moonlight from outside seeped in. Given their realms, they could clearly see everything in the room and the expression on each other's faces. The night was a bit cold. Fan Xian rubbed his hands and turned to close the door. He tugged on his shoes and walked to the side of Haitong's bed. Without a trace of politeness, he lifted a corner of the brocade quilt and burrowed in. Sitting on the other side of the bed, he looked at Haidang across the bed. The quilt was very warm. There was no fragrance. There was only a clean and warm feeling. Haidang looked at this scoundrel and helplessly said, "You have to know that I have thought about it. I am still going to marry in the future." Fan Xian's feet rubbed against the cotton cloth on the bed and sighed comfortably. He was also surprised and disappointed that he hadn't touched Haitong's feet. It looked like the girl across from him was sitting cross-legged. He said, "I am the adulterer." He then smiled and said, "You are the whore." "Of course," he said with a smile. "This is what people say." Haitang glared at him. Fan Xian said, "There's only one thing that I will not be satisfied with even if I die. Although I am born a bit better than others, I do not have the intention to seduce you." "What? How can you insist that we have an affair?" Duo, I cannot accept this. Today, I have already tarnished my reputation. It is not that I say a word of regret. In any case, it is like this. Why don't we have another reason? These words were said with hidden bitterness. Haidang only sighed. Although this section wasn't printed, Cece copied it 2 days ago and showed it to me. Why do you have to use the same words Qingwen said in the 77th verse to ridicule me? I am not second master Bao, and you are not a pretty servant girl. Yiluyan has not hurt you to the point of death. You are pretending to be resentful, but who knows what you are angry about in your heart? Fan Xian shook his head with a self-mocking smile and didn't speak for a moment. The study that had been converted into a bedroom sank into silence. "I don't like to play around," Fan Xian said quietly. Fan Xian said quietly, "You probably don't understand what I mean, but I really do like to stay with you and talk." Haitong's bright eyes glowed in the dark night. "But right now, we are indeed very intimate," Fan Xian said with a slight smile. "I had originally wanted to pour out the bitterness in my heart, but I didn't expect that I would suddenly have a thought and find another bitter matter. Everyone will marry someone." Fan Xian half leaned against the foot of the bed and closed his eyes slightly. "But why is it that when I think of you marrying someone else in the future, my heart is so unhappy?" The smile in Haitong's eyes gradually became more and more like the moon in the water, and the strands of moon in the water gradually leaking out of the bamboo basket. Her hands gently pulled at the corner of the blanket and covered her chest. Looking at Fan Xian's face, she slowly said, "Then, how about marrying you? I had a lot of fun writing this chapter. Min, I would like to thank Sean for the youthful video that you provided. It is the last day of the month. As usual, I ask for monthly votes. Rules. To be continued. If you want to know what happens next, please log on to www.cmfu.com. More chapters. Support the author. Support original reading. Chapter 405. Haitang's words made Fan Xian feel very good and powerful. At this moment, this young man and woman were sharing a large blanket. Under the moonlit night, they were quietly talking about such moving matters. It was inevitable that they would descend into a very violent and cliché ending. However, Fan Xian was not surprised. He did not crawl under the bed in fright, or turn into a wolf and pounce. He only said sincerely, seriously, and straightforwardly, "Very good. Let's discuss the wedding date." This sentence was in response to the "How about marrying you?" Thus, it was Haitang's turn to be stunned. She felt as if she had spun a cocoon and was caught in it. She knew that she had once again underestimated the shamelessness and blackness under Fan Xian's gentle appearance. She chuckled and lowered her head. She was also muttering in her heart, why did such a sentence pop up? During this year, she and Fan Xian had often interacted. The two of them had long developed a sense of closeness and tacit understanding that went beyond friendship through familiarity. It was close to family. Fan Xian looked at her expression and knew what she was thinking. Raising his brows, he smiled and said, "Your Empress Dowager, your Emperor." Haitang raised her face and continued with a smile. "Your Baldy," Fan Xian continued with a serious expression. Haitang tilted her head slightly. "Your identity, and your identity," Fan Xian said with a slight smile. These few sentences without a head or tail had already clearly laid out the obstacles and problems that lay between the two of them. When a man and a woman interacted, it was important to be of one heart. Although the two of them did not say sweet words of love, with the moonlight as proof, they could see through each other's thoughts. There were countless mediocre people in the world of mortals. It was rare to find a confidant who would easily pass it up and let it go. The problem was, the Qing Emperor certainly did not want Fan Xian to have such a powerful foreign aid from Northern Qi's Tianyi Dao while he had such great power. Furthermore, the Northern Qi Empress Dowager had been urgently searching for a young and handsome man of equal status for Haitang this year. She could not let Haitang handle it herself. Fan Xian and Haitang's status in their respective countries meant that if the two of them broke out of their current situation and openly stood shoulder to shoulder, they would face unimaginable pressure. The Qing kingdom side was easier to handle. Even if the Qing emperor did not like Fan Xian receiving foreign aid, given the emperor's powerful self-confidence, he would inevitably think of using Fan Xian's situation to further weaken Northern Qi's power. Fan Xian could use this reason to convince his father, who he was not very close to. In the eyes of the Qing people, Fan Xian marrying Haitang was a joyous matter that brought face to the Qing people. Who wouldn't want to take advantage of something? The resistance from Northern Qi must be great. Regardless of whether or not Northern Qi's self-proclaimed orthodox subjects could accept it, the pride of their country, Saintess Haitang, a Tianmai warrior, being married to the southern barbarians they despised deep down, including the Empress Dowager and Ku He, would all prevent this from happening. The two sides could discuss the exchange of students, but the Northern Qi people were clearly at a disadvantage when it came to marrying off girls. How could they be willing to do that? As for the little emperor, even Fan Xian admired his methods and didn't have any extravagant hopes that he would let go. Fan Xian smiled self-mockingly and said, "You came to Jiangnan because your little emperor asked you to supervise me making money. If you become my family's fated old woman, we could be considered a husband and wife shop, spending his money however we want. Wouldn't he be angry to death?" Haitang smiled and said, "If he heard your words, he would be angry to death." Fan Xian sighed and said, "Actually, if you marry me and our whole family go to a secluded place to spend the rest of our lives, it would work. Who cares how angry the courts of the two countries will be?" Haitang gazed at him with a not-quite-there smile. "Are you willing?" Fan Xian was silent for a moment and gazed back at her, unwilling to show weakness. "Are you willing?" The two of them met each other's eyes and knew that they both had ties in their hearts. They both had a sliver of kindness toward the world. Although Fan Xian's kindness came from his selfish heart and Haitang's came from her kind nature, no matter who it was, they could not leave lightly and coldly watch everything that happened in the world from beyond the clouds. They were all people who had entered the world. How could they be unworldly? The room once again fell silent. In the night sky above Hua Garden, the crescent moon suddenly pierced through the smoke-like clouds. Its light increased slightly and reflected off the walls and ponds in the garden and into the room. It covered the large bed, the brocade quilt, and the two wonderful people with a layer of light. Haiteng looked at him calmly and suddenly smiled slightly. What is important is that you already have a wife. Fan Xian fell silent. He knew these words were not easy to respond to. He had been reborn into this world for almost 20 years, yet he had never heard of the custom of taking two wives. Although he had once talked to Uncle Wu Zhu about the three representatives and the three main purposes on the cliff, one of which was to marry many, many wives when things came to a head, he found that to be a Dumas with all the beauties alone was, in reality, very difficult. What was important was that his standards were too high. He sighed shamelessly. There was no need to talk about Wanner. She was the most favored princess in the palace. In front of him, Haiteng, who could no longer bear to let go, had an incomparably lofty position in northern Qi. Earlier, he had already laid out so many obstacles. What if he let Haiteng enter as a concubine? Fan Xian shivered. Even he felt that this matter was somewhat ironic. Furthermore, he believed that the northern Qi people would certainly go crazy. Perhaps the two countries would go to war again. Are you cold? Haiteng looked at him with a smile. Her hands pulled at the bedding and carefully covered her shoulders. Fan Xian smiled bitterly and sighed. My heart is cold. The night was indeed a bit cold. The large quilt was sleeping together, but it could not cover the two of them. Haiteng pulled a little, and Fan Xian's upper body was empty outside. He shivered slightly and pulled it back. With a swish, Haiteng was startled. She found that the quilt had been snatched away by him. She glared angrily at him and snatched it back. Fan Xian chuckled and didn't say anything. He snatched it back. The two of them played the childish game of snatching the quilt on the bed. Fortunately, neither of them used Jinqi. Otherwise, how could the quilt be condemned to death? It would have long become thousands of cotton wads dancing in the night wind, torn apart and perished. But how could the quilt be so lucky? It could actually be fought over by the two most famous and powerful people of the younger generation, not giving an inch of land. The quilt was not a jade seal. If these two people followed the original course of history, perhaps many years later, they would be standing in each other's countries and fighting for the world. But now that they had begun to fight for the quilt, the world should not fight anymore. Heaven blessed the people of the world. It was rare for them to have such a wild quarrel. The two of them closed their mouths tightly and glared at each other. Haiteng's legs, which had been crossed, also came down. She kicked with embarrassment and anger. Thus, the lecher Fan Xian seized the opportunity. Fan Xian let go, and the large quilt was immediately snatched away by Haiteng. With a whoosh, the curtains were rolled up, burying Haiteng's upper body in the soft bedding. The girl let out a surprised cry. A pair of legs wearing thin panties were exposed outside the quilt. Particularly the pair of bare feet. They were pure white and tempting. Fan Xian stretched out his hand and covered this pair of feet. Haiteng's feet trembled slightly, but she did not struggle. Don't catch a cold, Fan Xian said righteously. He was actually very proud in his heart. His grab earlier had indeed reached his highest realm. It was as fast as lightning, as fast as a gust of wind. Once the sunflower came out, it faintly had some of the realm of the blind uncle hitting people with a bamboo stick. How could Haiteng dodge it? Perhaps. Haiteng did not even want to dodge. The touch was not bad. Fan Xian held the girl's feet in his arms and narrowed his eyes proudly. For some reason, his mind thought of his previous life. When he was in high school, it snowed heavily and he held the female class monitor's feet in his arms like this. Oh, only when he was happy would he remember those things that were already so far away that they were almost blurry. Let go. Buried in the quilt, Haiteng spoke in a humming voice. However, there was an additional glimmer of anger in her tone. Fan Xian hesitantly let go. It completely went against the perseverance a man should have at this time. Haiteng flipped the quilt off and looked at him angrily. However, her face was slightly red and her hair was messy. It looked very threatening. Fan Xian watched as she pulled her feet back into the quilt. He chuckled and didn't say anything. A slight blush appeared on Haitang's face. She glared at him and then turned toward the inside of the bed. Fan Xian quietly transformed into a black cat and crawled over. He lay next to her, but he lay very orderly. In a voice as thin as a mosquito's, he said, "It's cold. Give me a blanket." Haitang used a bee-like voice to buzz. "You don't have your own hands?" Although she said this, the girl still moved a little further in to give Fan Xian some space. At the same time, she left half of the quilt for him. Fan Xian lay down comfortably and sniffed hard. He found that he indeed didn't smell any body fragrance. There was only a peaceful, clean, and gentle feeling enveloping him. He opened a pair of bright eyes and looked at the ceiling of the tent in the dark night. The two of them lay on the same bed. Silence was awkwardness, and awkwardness was warmth. Earlier, Fan Xian had said he didn't play around with warmth, but in reality, he loved this feeling. He thought to himself, Duo has finally revealed her childish side today. It is very interesting, very interesting. He completely did not realize that his heart had a strange fetish. Haitang calmed down slightly. She carefully revealed her face and said, "You really don't want me to marry?" "Yes." Fan Xian put his hands behind his head and smiled slightly. "Even if you want to marry, you can't marry someone else. It can only be me." Haitang lost. "I came here today to pour out my troubles to you." Fan Xian glanced at the girl beside him and told her of his earlier worry in the garden. Haitang thought for a bit, and then quietly said, "Isn't it inappropriate to tell me about the matter between you and your wife at this time?" Fan Xian was startled. Only then did he realize that he seemed to have been a bit of a bastard. He couldn't help but smile bitterly and say, "Fine, let's talk about Yiluyan. I still don't understand why he would come to Suzhou and show himself." Once they got down to business, Haitang's childish side suddenly disappeared. She recovered her usual calm and stability. Turning around, she began to discuss and analyze with Fan Xian. At the same time, she told him about following Yiluyan from afar along the way, as well as the story of what happened along the way. The two of them talked back and forth, but still couldn't come to a conclusion. It was Haitang who suddenly said lightly, "There is one possibility. I wonder if you've thought about it." "What is it?" Fan Xian asked curiously. Perhaps the emperor had long known of the Yi family's connection to the Juanshan conference, so Yiluyan was not worried about the emperor knowing he had acted, Haitang said seriously. Fan Xian thought for a while, and then shook his head. "It still doesn't make sense." After talking about Yiluyan, what did they talk about? The old manor in Jingdou. Linwaner? Naturally, this was a question that was not convenient to talk about in bed. Fan Xian would more or less feel guilty. No matter how open Haitang's heart was, she was not an ignorant and senseless wooden person. Lying like this, their breaths intertwined, their body heat invaded, and their occasional contact, although it was not truly ecstatic, it still made the temperature in the blankets slowly rise. "Let's talk about the temple," Fan Xian said lightly, perhaps having made up his mind. A glimmer of gentleness and emotion flashed through Haitang's eyes. She smiled slightly and said, "By Westlake and Hangzhou, you said you only talked about worldly affairs." "The temple is my business," Fan Xian smiled and said. "In the future, it is also your business." For some reason, the warmth and trust in these words warmed Haitang. Even if she was the northern Qi Saint girl, able to enter and leave the palace without any hindrance, and had an outstanding status, where would she go to find a confidant, a true friend, someone who could treat her as an equal and treat her without any ill feelings? Wu? Haitang got up slightly and gestured in the air with her finger. One up, one down, one up, one down. She drew a few semicircles. Her brows were furrowed tightly. "Then what does the symbol on the temple mean?" Fan Xian had already described in detail what Shaoan had told her in the cave. Only, out of consideration for the girl's feelings, he hid the matter of Master Ku eating human flesh. Haitang listened quietly the entire time. When she recounted Shaoan's past in Northern Wei, a complicated emotion occasionally flashed through her eyes. In the end, She was puzzled by those symbols, so she opened her mouth to ask. How would I know? Fan Xian said with a headache. It looks like one day I will have to go to the temple to take a look. Determination gradually appeared in Haitong's bright, limpid eyes. I want to go. Fan Xian smiled. I know how tempting this is for you, so you have to promise me. You can't sneak off by yourself. He pointed at his head and said, Shaolin's route back in the day was hidden here. Who was the girl who ran out of the temple? Haidang asked. In reality, she had already faintly guessed. Although the answer did not surprise her, it still made her sigh uncontrollably. My mother. Fan Xian spoke very proudly. Thus, the conversation began to turn back to the Yi family. Occasionally, they would talk about the blind uncle's elegance. The more she listened to the details, the stronger the longing in Haitong's eyes became. Back then, what kind of era was that? The girl sighed. The 4 great grandmasters all appeared in that era. Other than that, there were your mother and the blind uncle, 2 dazzling figures. Fan Xian joked, in a few days, you'll have to call me Granny. Haidang couldn't be bothered to pay attention to him. She sighed to herself. Coming out of the temple, could it be? Her eyes lit up. Miss, you should be a Tian Mai being? What is a Tian Mai being? Fan Xian laughed coldly. Naturally, he wouldn't tell her the wondrous story of transmigration. Everyone under heaven says you are a Tian Mai being. What do you think? Haitang smiled. Teacher said that those who can receive the will of heaven and be chosen by the temple are Tian Mai beings. I don't know why teacher calls me that. According to this saying, isn't Ku he a Tian Mai being? The martial methods of your Tiani Dao were truly stolen by my mother from the temple. They were stolen. They weren't taught by the immortals of the temple. This is a matter of scholars. Stealing books. How can it be stealing? Could Missy have a special bloodline? Haidang suddenly became interested. Her bright eyes stared at Fan Xian's face. Your meridians are completely different from those of ordinary people. Otherwise, you would not be able to practice such strange and tyrannical martial methods. This must have something to do with your mother's past. Fan Xian looked at the girl's expression and knew what she was thinking. He smiled coldly and said, Are you thinking that my future child might also be a strange one? Haidang smiled faintly and didn't reply. Don't think about things like borrowing seeds. Fan Xian didn't know if it was because he thought of his romantic birth, but his anger flared. He lowered his voice and roared. And don't think about putting aphrodisiacs in a wine. Haidang looked at his angry expression and only smiled and didn't say anything. See, Lily isn't pregnant. Fan Xian thought of that matter, and a bellyful of fire gradually grew. The bodies of the 2 people under the blanket were already hot like fire. Now that the evil fire had been provoked, how could it not ignite the fire of desire? Fan Xian gritted his teeth and pressed his face together. He didn't care if Duo would easily kill him with a flip of her hand. He pulled her into his arms and held her. Holding her from behind, he felt the girl's slightly hot and trembling body in front of him. Fan Xian said by her ear, If you're truly interested, you don't need to use aphrodisiacs. I'm also willing to give myself to you. Walking out of the boudoir early in the morning, what did this mean? Fan Xian smiled slightly and gazed at the serving girl and warmly said, Morning. He then walked to the front garden. Along the way, he saw the serving girls and subordinates and warmly said, Morning. For a moment, the people in the garden did not understand. They thought, when did Sir Fan become so cultured and refined? How could his mood be so good that it made one's hair stand on end? Immediately, the shocking news gradually spread through the mouths of the servants throughout Hua Garden. Immediately after, it reached the ears of Fan Xian's subordinates. Cece's mouth was wide open as she listened to the news. Although she knew it would happen sooner or later, she still felt it was a bit sudden. In particular, she suddenly felt that the letter in her hand had become somewhat heavy. Last night, she had slept deeply and had forgotten to give this letter to the young master. She was the head serving girl of the old Danzhou manor. All her thoughts were on Fan Xian. She quickly asked the serving girl, Where's the young master right now? In the front hall? By the time Fan Xian had tidied up and was sitting in the front hall preparing to discuss matters, a few members of the Qinian unit, including Deng Ziyu, as well as Gao De and the 7 Tiger Guards, already knew the biggest news of the day in Hua Garden. The strong and powerful warriors looked at Fan Xian with respect on their faces. To be able to eat the Northern Chi Saint girl, not only did it require courage, it also required great martial arts. Deng Ziyu was the only one with a worried expression. He was highly regarded in the old manor in Jingdo, and Lin Wan'er was very good at managing her subordinates. She never hesitated to reward Fan Xian's personal guards. Furthermore, her personality was close and likable, so she was greatly respected and loved by the servants in the old manor. He suddenly felt that the situation was not good. Who would be the mistress of the Fan family in the future? He, as well as all the servants, stood on the side of the mistress. However, he couldn't help but think with a chill in his heart, if there was conflict in the Fan family in the future, how could the mistress defeat Haidang? Fan Xian didn't know what his trusted aide was thinking. He only continued to drink the porridge. In reality, the main reason last night was because talking with Haidang was too exhausting. He also had to make arrangements for Yi Liuyun's mysterious appearance and analyze the situation between the two countries. Naturally, he was tired. However, if he said this, no one would believe him. Discussing national affairs under the covers? Forget it. At this time, Cece finally rushed to the front hall and handed over the letter in her hand. Fan Xian looked at the handwriting on the letter and paused. When he tore open the letter and read, his mouth immediately opened slightly. The porridge almost flowed out. Chapter 406. Wan'er had not yet arrived, but the people Fan Xian had sent out in Suzhou began to come back one by one. They had scattered Fan Xian's sinister seeds throughout Jiangnan and brought back the good news Fan Xian needed. The first to return was Xia Qifei. Fan Xian did not meet him in Hua Garden because Baiwa Brothel was half-ruined, so it was impossible to meet him there. In the end, he chose to go to Xia Ming's manor in the south of the city in the middle of the night. Fan Xian had paid for this garden. However, after he had come once with the third prince, he had never come again. The travel-worn Xia Qifei looked at Fan Xian, who was walking up the steps under the protection of the Tiger Guards, and jumped in fright. He had planned to go to Hua Garden in the afternoon, but had been told to wait in the manor. He had not expected the commissioner to personally come. Respectfully welcoming Fan Xian into the study, these two illegitimate children did not exchange too many pleasantries. Fan Xian did not have the patience to express the warmth of a superior, so he directly entered the topic. Through Xia Qifei's report, Fan Xian's heart, which had been hanging in the air, finally relaxed. Ever since Xia Qifei had accepted the palace treasury's major bids, he had, with the help of the Overwatch Council, mobilized the Jianghu brothers of the Jiang and Water Bandits and began to move toward the right path. However, they were, after all, Jianghu people. Fan Xian was always worried that the 7th Ming disciple would not be able to handle matters properly. Only tonight did he truly relax. It looked like Xia Qifei had indeed inherited some of the old Ming master's talent. He did not neglect the necessary skills of buying goods, bills of lading, opening roads, and bribing officials. What made Fan Xian feel most at ease was that after Xia Ming's merchant group passed through Jiangbei, they made contact with the northern Qi people in a small town to the south of Sangzhou. On the northern Qi side, the little emperor had arranged for Changningho's son, Wei Hua, to be the head of the brocade guard. Of course, there would not be any problems with the safety of the goods. However, Fan Xian was curious as to who had personally entered deep into the Qin kingdom and taken the risk to receive the first batch of goods. It was the commander himself. Xia Qifei himself seemed to be shocked at the meeting at the time. Fan Xian was also startled. He couldn't help but have a different opinion of Wei Hua. He held a high position, yet he dared to enter the Qin kingdom. He couldn't help but feel great disdain for the defensive power in the Sangzhou area. The Northern Qi Brocade Guard was only responsible for the safety of the road to the north. In the past, it had been the Northern Qi Empress Dowager and the eldest princess who had made the deal. After doing it for so many years, they were already familiar with it. Now, it was the little emperor and Fan Xian making the deal. This was their first deal, so they had to be careful. What about our people in the north? He suddenly asked with a frown. Xia Qifei carefully looked at him and took out a letter from his bosom. This is a letter that Lord Wang asked this lowly official to bring back. He also brought a gift to the south. Fan Xian accepted the letter and saw that it was indeed Wang Qinyan's unique handwriting. He didn't take the long box that Xia Qifei handed over and indicated for him to put to the side. Shaking his head, he asked, Wang Qinyan is more afraid of death than I am. Of course, he wouldn't foolishly head south. However, we have to have someone follow. Which merchant company is taking over the north? In reality, he knew that the Cui family's routes in the north had all been privately taken over by him. The Qing court had always thought that the northern Qi emperor controlled them. Only a few people in the Fan manor, the Yin family, and a few of Fan Xian's trusted aides knew about the matter of the second Fan prince privately controlling the northern smuggling routes. The Qing emperor only knew that the second Fan prince was in the north. He had not expected Fan Xian to have his young brother manage such a major matter. Fan Xian did not plan on telling this to Xia Qifei, so he only asked casually. He wanted to use Xia Qifei's mouth to find out how his brother was doing in the north. Unfortunately, at the time, Xia Qifei's attention was all on the extremely daring commander of the Brocade Guard and did not pay much attention to the merchant companies in the north. However, he had faintly heard some rumors. He heard that the merchant in the north responsible for handling the palace treasury's smuggled goods was ruthlessly mysterious. Normal people didn't even know if the boss was a man or a woman. Fan Xian smiled. A glimmer of relief rose to his eyes. It looked like Xia had finally learned to be low-key and endure. However, Haidang was in Jiangnan. Only he and Wang Qinyan were in the north. It was not convenient for the spy system of the 4th Bureau of the Overwatch Council to handle too many things for him. The Northern Qi Emperor would not make things difficult for him for his sake. However, for a young man to be in such a dangerous situation, it was truly hard on him. However, Fan Xian did not plan on sending people to help him. His experience of being reborn clearly told him that as long as it was cold, it would emerge through grinding. Xia had a talent for business. If he did not undergo such difficult and complicated grinding, it would truly be a pity. After chatting a bit more with Xia Qifei, Fan Xian admired the head of the Jiangnan water bandits in front of him more and more. Now he was his subordinate. It looked like subduing this person in Shazhou was indeed very beneficial to his Jiangnan plan. Everything will be done according to the established plan, Fan Xian said seriously. Fan Xian said seriously. Su Wenmao is in the palace treasury. I will leave Deng Ziyu in Suzhou. Deputy Ma Jia will handle the matter of transferring goods from the palace treasury. As for the matter of accounts, if you find it difficult to sort it out, listen to the opinions of those old officials. Those old officials were all good hands pulled from the Ministry of Revenue. They were a great gift that the Minister of Revenue Fan Jian had given to his son. It was ruthlessly simple to do some empty accounts and play some tricks. Xia Qifei made a sound of acknowledgement and hesitantly said, "This is the first time. The route to the north has been opened. However, we can't hide it for too long." Fan Xian thought for a bit, and a cold smile rose to his brows. "What are you afraid of? Every year, Xinjiang is smuggled. Who doesn't know? As long as we don't get hold of our weakness, who could do anything to us?" Xia Qifei's heart froze. He found that the commissioner was indeed very daring and full of confidence. However, he kept thinking of another matter. His face couldn't help revealing a strange emotion. Fan Xian watched and couldn't help smiling. He gazed at him calmly and said, "Are you not satisfied with the Ming family matter?" Xia Qifei thought for a bit. The bits and pieces of this half a year taught him that it was best not to hide anything in front of this young man. Gritting his teeth, he gathered his courage and said, "Qing Cheng is not satisfied." Fan Xian gazed at him with a not-quite-there smile. "The old Ming matriarch is already dead." Xia Qifei was silent. When the Ming garden was in chaos, he had been following orders to the north to deliver goods, so he had not participated in this matter. Along the way, he had received the news. He had also seen the scene of the Jiangnan people wearing mourning. He couldn't help smiling bitterly and saying, although she died, it was still a glorious death. Fan Xian quietly said, do you know how the old Ming matriarch died? Xiao Qifei raised his head in shock and gazed at Fan Xian, thinking, did you not help me force her to death? Suddenly, his mind moved. He thought of how the hearts of the Jiangnan people were slightly chaotic and then calm, and how the Ming garden was unusually quiet after the funeral. He couldn't help but think of a terrifying possibility. Ming Qingda, he asked in disbelief. Fan Xian nodded his head coldly. I won't hide this from you. It is a small matter for the emperor to take over the Ming family, but it is a difficult matter for him to take over the Ming family peacefully. The present situation is something I have plotted with great difficulty. Don't destroy it. Xiao Qifei immediately understood everything. So, the commissioner and Ming Qingda had a secret agreement. He couldn't help but feel a mix of emotions in his heart. He also faintly felt fear. Would he become a useless, abandoned pawn? Fan Xian's following words surprised him again. You are not satisfied. Actually, I'm not satisfied either. Fan Xian smiled slightly and said. The Ming family has 6 branches. Right now, you and I can only control 2 of them. After this matter, Ming Qingda has finally become the true master of the Ming family, but I cannot act openly. That old fox has tricked me. Do you think I won't have him return it? Xiao Qifei opened his mouth slightly. A fervent hope flashed through his eyes. When do we act? Don't let the fever go to your head at the mention of revenge. Fan Xian seemed to be lecturing him. It was also like he was narrating some great, distant, and personal cause. The Jiangnan people's blood letters have long been sent to Jingdou. The emperor's edict to scold me should arrive in a few days, Fan Xian continued. At this time, I will not act against Ming Qingda again. I don't understand. Xiao Qifei thought of something and said doubtfully, what benefit does Ming Qingda gain by doing this? Would he be so childishly as to believe that as long as he lowers his head, the emperor will give him a way out? Fan Xian glanced at him with praise and said, he is just stalling for time. Stalling for time? Correct. Fan Xian sighed. Using his mother's life in exchange for a year's time. That day, I once said that your big brother does things even more ruthlessly than I do. A year's time, Xiao Qifei asked with confusion. What use can it have? Naturally, Fan Xian would not tell him about the seemingly calm, but unusually dangerous situation in Jingdou. He only smiled coldly and said, your big brother is groveling and enduring, swaying from side to side, all because he wants to see clearly the situation in court a year from now. As for you and me, we will just watch for a year. After a year, the other side would probably be unable to resist acting, right? After a year, he would be able to kill some people. Don't rush. Fan Xian persuaded Xiao Qifei and, at the same time, convinced himself. Your big brother is a clever person. In the end, he is swaying from side to side. He wants to not offend either side. So in the end, he will also die because of his cleverness. Because, in the end, he has no power. As Fan Xian said this, he suddenly thought of the 3 sentences Yi Luyan had said to him before his sword cut through half the building. Involuntarily, his heart chilled. Could it be that the great Grandmaster had seen further than him, and had already seen some danger that he had not? After the imperial envoy was attacked in Baiyue brothel, the Jiangnan governor, Xue Qing, was furious. He immediately made a powerful response. All of the Ming Garden's private soldiers were disarmed. He thought to himself that even the Shadow, someone who only knew how to kill, could make such a simple deduction. What exactly was Yi Luyan thinking? Will Sigajin not sneak out of Dongyi? Although this was what Fan Xian thought, he still couldn't help but habitually want to frame Dongyi and not want such a large crack to appear within the Qing kingdom. The Shadow was silent for a moment and then said, he hasn't left the sword hut in 6 years. Fan Xian was shocked. He knew the Shadow's identity, so he trusted his judgment and source of information. If it was truly like this, then this matter was too strange. No wonder the Qing people had framed Sigajin countless times and Dongyi had never had any direct reaction. Fanxian suddenly thought of a wonderful possibility. Say, he propped up his chin and asked energetically, "Is it possible that your idiot brother has already died?" No. The shadow's words could only be met with a sigh from Fanxian. As long as he doesn't go out, it's fine. Fanxian immediately thought of another wonderful thing and smiled. As long as Sigu Jian doesn't go out, I'm not afraid someone will kill me. The shadow thought for a bit and silently accepted this reality. He then asked, "I heard Yi Luyun came." This was the second time the shadow had said this. It was clear Fanxian didn't want to discuss this problem. He hadn't expected the other party to be so persistent. He couldn't resist saying angrily, "I also heard love has returned. Is it Yi Luyun? Did he come or not? Is that important?" "It is very important," the shadow said with a rare seriousness. The shadow used a rarely seen seriousness and said, "My idol is Sir Wu. The person I want to defeat the most is Sigajian. If I could fight with Sir Yi Luyun, it would be enough to comfort me for the rest of my life. Sir, I am jealous of you." Fanxian was defeated. Sincerely, he said, "Don't be jealous of me. Next time something as good as this happens, I will certainly leave it for you. As for Yi Luyun, I can promise you that if you fight with him, the one to die will certainly be you, and it will be a very thorough death." The shadow was silent. He then turned and left, disappearing into the darkness. Fanxian suddenly thought of something. Facing the completely empty night, he quietly said, "I'm going to Hangzhou the day after tomorrow. Come with me." He didn't know if Haitang would follow him to Hangzhou to pick up Wanner. For the sake of safety, he had the shadow at his side. It was much more reassuring. After that night, Fanxian and Haitang resumed their usual interactions. However, occasionally, when their gazes met, there would be something more unclear and unclear. Strangely, Haitang was as lazy as ever and quiet as ever. It was Fanxian who became awkward. Occasionally, a smiling expression would appear in Haitang's eyes, which made Fanxian very angry. However, this reality also made Fanxian understand that even if he used underhanded methods to get the news out, he might not be able to tie such a unique woman to his side for a lifetime. Fanxian had once encouraged Ro to travel around, much less someone like Duo. However, Fanxian was just as selfish as he had always admitted. There were very few young men in this world who dared to marry Haitang Duo. After he made such a big scandal, who would dare to marry her? Never marrying was fine as long as she didn't marry someone else. An evil smile flashed through his eyes. He tore open the letter Wang Qinian had sent back and hurriedly scanned it. He couldn't resist smiling again. It looked like Lao Wang was not having a good time in northern Qi. The burden on his back was too heavy. It was not as comfortable as being by his side. This letter was asking about the date of his return. Fanxian understood his emotions. Being in a foreign country, one would indeed feel lonely. Furthermore, once things went wrong, regardless of whether it was the Overwatch Council or the court, they could all abandon him. This feeling of being an abandoned child was not good. As he thought about it, he suddenly sighed. Tonight, he had first met Xia Qifei, then the Shadow, and even Wang Qinian, who was far away in the north. They were all capable subordinates of his. As for the first two brothers, they both carried a blood feud with them. They were the youngest members of their large clans, drifting about the world, unable to return to their homes. In fact, wasn't his own life experience the same? The gathering of abandoned children would, in the end, become exciting. On the first day of the month, I seriously canvassed for monthly votes. Last month, 4th place and 3,000 yuan in prize money, all thanks to everyone's votes. I express my sincere thanks. This month, I still have to seriously canvass for monthly votes. However, at the end of December, I told everyone that during this year's spring festival, my whole family will be returning to our hometown for the new year. I haven't been back in 10 years. Not to mention the many matters and the lack of time. The important thing is that our hometown is a small mountain village. There really is no place to write. I also don't have the habit of storing up manuscripts. Everyone knows this, so I'm also thinking about how to deal with it. In any case, I have to ask for leave in advance. This month's updates will certainly not be sufficient. As for monthly votes, if everyone is willing to vote for me, please do so. As for the book review, I have a few words to say. First, don't be rude in the discussion. Don't use foul language. I'll have to trouble everyone to maintain that. Second, regardless of whether you're male or female, if you want to scold Fan Xian, please do so, because I'm writing about a selfish boy. But please don't scold me. I'm very weak. Ha! The important thing is everyone is an adult. You should understand the relationship between the characters in the book and the author. Third, thank you everyone. Please have some tea. To be continued, if you want to know what happens next, please log on to www.cmfu.com. There are more chapters. Support the author. Support the original reading. Chapter 407. After Fan Xian finished reading the council report, he felt his eyes dry up. He couldn't resist cursing a few times in his heart. When he was young, his name and courtesy name had been arranged by those people. His surname was Fan, his first name was Xian, and his courtesy name was Enji. Now that he thought about it, this name was naturally given to him by the emperor in the palace. However, ever since he entered Jingdo, or more accurately, since last year's spring examination, when had he ever had a day of leisure? Occasionally, he would ask himself, using the knowledge and experience of 2 lives to judge, Fan Xian had to come to a conclusion that did not make him happy. The emperor in the palace had treated him well. Although he knew that the emperor had given him so much power, a large part of it was because the emperor needed someone like him to exist to balance the situation in court, and he had indeed demonstrated this ability. The royal family was heartless. For the emperor to be where he was today, on one hand, it had to be said that it was his mother's grace. On the other hand, it showed that the emperor did indeed have some father-son affection for him. At least, he was not like Han Wu, who was still alive and living better and better. Of course, Fan Xian would not revel in this father-son affection. He was strangely clear-headed and calm. Thus, he was still a bit angry at the emperor for throwing him to Jiangnan and giving him so much work and such troublesome things. He was not a donkey, although Haidang seemed to like ordering Xija around like a donkey. He rubbed his eyes and took out the rectangular box beside him. Curiously, he tore open the seal on the outside. This was a gift Wang Qinian had carefully asked Xia Qifei to bring back. The letter said it was for him, but did not say what it was. The box slowly opened, revealing the true appearance of the item inside. Fan Xian narrowed his eyes. It was a sword that did not look extraordinary, but emanated an ancient aura. He took out the long sword. His right hand gripped the hilt steadily and slowly pulled. Without a sound, the edge of the sword left its sheath. Like the layer of snow on Tsang Mountain, like the smear of jade in North Lake, like a wisp of wind in Jiangnan, the clear and bright sword light rippled in the study. It was incomparably gentle, but there was a bone-piercing coldness in the gentleness. Fan Xian's expression changed slightly. He could see the value and sharpness of this sword. What particularly moved him was that the killing intent in this gentleness was quite similar to his own strange personality. He flipped his wrist and casually waved it twice. He felt that the weight of the sword was very suitable. The blade of the sword pierced through the air silently and brushed the candle 3 times, but the candle did not move at all. In the past, the weapons Fan Xian was used to using were nothing more than a hidden crossbow and the slender, pure black dagger at his boot. Although he was very efficient when killing people, in the end, he did not have a weapon that suited him, particularly if he was fighting a true ace head-on. Because he had been stabbed by the shadow, Fan Xian had learned Sigu Sword's secret very effectively. These days, he had focused on practicing and could be considered to have made some progress. That night, he had killed Yuan Jingming, which was already proof of this. With Sigu's sword in his heart, Fan Xian increasingly wanted to wear a good sword. When he killed Yuan Ming, he had borrowed a flexible sword from Haidang. I can't live off a woman, and I'm embarrassed to keep borrowing her flexible sword. Fan Xian lightly flicked the edge of the sword and listened to a slight buzzing sound. He couldn't help but nod his head in approval, thinking that Lao Wang's flattery was truly appropriate. He picked up the piece of paper in a box and looked at it. On it was written Wang Qinyan's skillful flattery. First, he regretted that he shouldn't have peeked at Sir Fan's letter last year. Finally, he talked about the origin of this sword. So, this sword was the sword of the last emperor of the Wei Kingdom. Back then, the Wei Kingdom had been broken up by the Qin Kingdom. The Zhan family had taken advantage of the situation to rise, but the treasures in the royal palace had long been stolen and sold by the eunuchs. This sword had since then also wandered among the people, never to be seen again. It was only after 20 years that traces of it finally appeared. After Wang Qinyan learned of it, he spent a large sum of money to buy it. He then carefully made some external changes before sending it to Jiangnan. So, it is this emperor's sword. Fan Xian looked at the sword and smiled, but he did not think much of it in his heart. If this sword truly had an imperial aura attached to it, the Northern Wei Emperor would not have died back then. However, he immediately furrowed his brows. Wang Qinyan now knew that he was the emperor's illegitimate child. He had spent a large sum of money to buy the Wei Emperor's sword and had traveled thousands of li to give it to him. Was this purely flattery, or was he using this sword to hint at something? Fan Xian shook his head and sighed. He thought to himself, Wang Qinyan was such an old man with a wife and daughter. How could he be so daring? He was probably thinking too much. He felt a bit uncomfortable in his heart. It looked like he was the same as the emperor. They were both suspicious people in their bones. Fan Xian blew out the candle and left the study to sleep peacefully. He couldn't resist muttering, Zorro. The room door closed, the moonlight was still, and the candle had broken into 4 pieces. One was frozen on the table, and the other 3 were rolling restlessly. 3 days later, the angels from Jingdo finally arrived in Suzhou. The angels were not those eunuchs with wings. They were eunuchs responsible for helping the emperor send messages. They could not fly, so they could only ride horses. Naturally, they were slower. Hua Garden was tidied up. The courtyard was swept, the incense table was set up, and the related matters were prepared. With Fan Xian in the lead, the third prince as his deputy, everyone in the Qinian unit of the Overwatch Council, as well as the 6 bureau guards and tiger guards, dozens of people stood obediently in front of the front yard, waiting for the arrival of the imperial edict. As the northern Qi Saint girl, it was not convenient for Haitang to be present. She had long left. However, Fan Xian and his group waited for a long time and still did not see anyone come. Fan Xian was a bit annoyed. He called for someone to bring over a grand wooden chair. He sat in the corridor and had Cici peel melon seeds beside him while he chatted idly with the third prince. Deng Ziyu's expression appeared awkward. He moved closer to his ear and said, Sir, be careful. We have to wait. His gaze flickered to the side. Fan Xian knew what he wanted to say. The subordinates of the Overwatch Council did not matter. The third prince was now dead set on following him. However, his actions did indeed appear to be somewhat disrespectful of the emperor's authority. There were also 7 tiger guards beside him, as well as a few tiger guards responsible for the third prince's safety. Who knew whether or not there were people the emperor had sent to monitor him? Fan Xian narrowed his eyes and didn't say anything. During the trip to northern Qi, as well as the trip to Jiangnan, Gouda and the others had actually followed him. The 2 sides had gotten along fairly well. At least, they had not dragged him down or done anything that made him uncomfortable. Thus, Fan Xian had purposely revealed his true side for them to see. In any case, these 7 people would probably be his personal bodyguards for the rest of his life. Then, he would use the endless small mistakes to have them get used to his future big mistakes. Sometimes, a person's heart could not be bought. It could only be seduced. It was like this between men and women. It was actually also like this between men. As for the tiger guards beside the third prince, fortunately, Fan Xian didn't have to wait too long. Following the sound of a cannon salute from outside, a few palace guards took the lead and escorted a eunuch into the garden. Fan Xian had long stood up. Holding the third prince's hand, he went forward to greet them. He bowed deeply and quietly listened to the edict. The eunuch who came to announce the edict was Eunuch Yao. He was also an old acquaintance of Fan Xian's. The 2 of them exchanged glances. Eunuch Yao knew that this young master was anxious from waiting. His heart trembled. He quickly skipped over some of the procedures that could be skipped. He directly pulled open the bright yellow double damask edict and began to read it in a sharp voice. The contents of the imperial edict were not out of Fan Xian's expectations. Some of the sentences inside were even things that Fan Xian and the emperor had already discussed in secret letters. As the ruler of a country, he had to express shock and anger at the chaos in Jiangnan. The edict used seemingly harsh words to reprimand Fan Xian. However, in the edict, not a single word mentioned the Ming family. Fan Xian knelt on the ground. A glimmer of a smile flashed across the corners of his lips. This was as it should be. How could a mere Jiangnan noble family affect the heart of heaven? Although the matter this time could not be considered small, tens of thousands of people's blood letters have been sent to the capital, and a few rotten scholars were even going to file a lawsuit in Jingdou in front of the emperor. The emperor issuing an edict to reprimand Fan Xian could be considered giving the people of the world an explanation. However, in the imperial edict and the official documents of the court, they would never mention the Ming family and criticize Fan Xian for not handling matters carefully. As for what it was, the court did not say a word. This was what was called politics. It was just a few words of reprimand. Of course, it also fined Fan Xian a year's salary. There was no other punishment. Eunuch Yao's sharp voice stopped. Fan Xian and the others rose to give their thanks. They also asked about the emperor's health and other boring matters. Only then did Fan Xian accept the imperial edict with both hands and hand it to the official beside him to put away. Fined salary again? Fan Xian couldn't resist muttering. My old father and I haven't had any income these years. Who's going to support the family? He and the third prince walked in first. Eunuch Yao, with his body hunched and a fawning smile, followed behind them with small, quick steps. Lao Yao, you have to return the silver to me. Otherwise, I can only eat porridge. Fan Xian smiled and scolded. Eunuch Yao put on a bashful face and hurried forward a few steps. Please spare me. Who doesn't know that you are the best at earning silver in the world? You've been in Jiangnan for less than half a year, and you've earned tens of millions of liang for the court. Why would you need my scraps of silver? As Eunuch Yao spoke, he silently and quickly glanced toward the third prince out of the corner of his eyes. Fan Xian's earlier joke could be said to be a big deal or a small one. In the past, the Fan family had indeed fed the eunuchs in the palace well. Of course, he knew that Fan Xian did not think much of his gains. However, this mischievous joke had been said in front of the third prince. Eunuch Yao knew that although the little prince was young, his heart was ruthless. He couldn't help but feel a bit afraid. Unexpectedly, he saw from the corner of his eye that the third prince's expression was calm, as if he hadn't heard it. He then thought that since Fan Xian dared to say such things in front of the third prince, then he must have a sense of propriety. Eunuch Yao's heart trembled. He knew that the things the palace guessed might not be wrong. The third prince and Sir Fan Jr. were indeed like that. I don't have the guts to touch the silver earned for the court. Are you perhaps advising me to be corrupt? The three of them had already entered the central hall. Fan Xian and the third prince sat on either side of the main seats. Eunuch Yao stood to the side. Hearing these words, he forced a smile and said, Sir Fan Jr., please don't make fun of me. Fan Xian smiled and waved his hand to indicate for him to sit. Eunuch Yao quickly sat down. This long journey had indeed made him very tired. I thought you would come earlier. You made me wait for a while, Fan Xian said as he ate sunflower seeds. The third prince was also imitating Fan Xian's manner of eating sunflower seeds. Eunuch Yao looked closely and suddenly felt that his eyes were a bit blurry. These brothers in the upper seats were indeed too similar. It was just that one was a size bigger and one was a size smaller. He quickly smiled apologetically and explained, I indeed arrived at the courier station outside the city yesterday. However, I had to follow the rules and could only enter the city today. There are 2 copies of the imperial edict. I went to the governor's manor first, so I came late. Please don't blame my legs for not being nimble. He carefully watched Fan Xian's expression and found that this young noble, who was so popular in court it was almost purple, did not show any signs of true anger. Only then did he let out a breath. In reality, with the identity of an imperial edict eunuch, he was like the emperor's mouthpiece. He was incomparably arrogant when he walked through the 7 roads and provinces. Even earlier in Xueqing's manner, the Jiangnan governor Xueqing had been very courteous toward this eunuch Yao of the palace. However, he could be arrogant anywhere. Only in Hua Garden did eunuch Yao not dare to be arrogant. Putting aside the fact that Fan Xian was some imperial envoy, just the identity of these 2 princes and Fan Xian's overwhelming power was enough to make eunuch Yao incomparably well-behaved. "Of course, I know you have to go to Governor Shui first," Fan Xian said without good humor. "Do you think I don't even know this little rule?" He shook his head and said, "What did the emperor say to the governor?" Eunuch Yao thought for a bit and said awkwardly, "Actually, it was pretty much the same as the edict he gave you." "Oh, Xueqing was also fined a year of salary?" Fan Xian raised his head and asked with interest. However, the tone of his question seemed to be a bit of schadenfreude. Eunuch Yao chuckled sinisterly and raised 3 fingers. "Fined for 3 years. Now I feel more balanced mentally." Fan Xian smiled and threw away the sunflower seed shells. "I said the emperor was wise and benevolent. He would not let a pitiful person like me take all the blame." Eunuch Yao smiled bitterly and thought to himself, "Were you saying? How am I supposed to respond?" Fortunately, Fan Xian immediately changed the topic and asked, "Why did they find an old man like you to come on such a long and arduous journey? Are there no young and capable eunuchs in the palace?" At the time, Lao Dai was training a few. As you know, after that incident, although he was recently transferred back from that pitiful place, this matter was delayed. This time, the imperial edict coming to Jiangnan was important, so I had to make a trip. Eunuch Yao sighed. "Is Lao Dai doing well?" Fan Xian asked. Eunuch Yao smiled. "Thanks to your great fortune, these old brothers in the palace are doing pretty well." The Qing Kingdom's palace was not the same as in history. Since the founding of the country, it had been very guarded against eunuchs. Particularly after the previous emperor ascended the throne 20 years ago, he strictly prevented eunuchs from interfering in national affairs. The palace was very strict. It was difficult for eunuchs to wield power, so they were not divided into many factions. On the contrary, these eunuchs knew that it was difficult for them to live in society and were very united. Ever since Fan Xian entered the capital, he had paid great attention to building a good relationship with these seemingly unremarkable eunuchs. When he was purging the first bureau, he had let Lao Dai's nephew go, which was the same as letting Lao Dai go. Furthermore, he had taken good care of them and never made excessive requests of these eunuchs. Most importantly, each time Fan Xian interacted with these eunuchs, he did not think of them as strange or evil people. He treated them as normal and did not purposely curry favor or humiliate them. He was not warm in front of them, but sinister behind their backs. It was this way of doing things that successfully made the eunuchs like this young commissioner very much. As long as they're doing well, Fan Xian couldn't help but shake his head. Qing Kingdom's eunuchs generally did not have too many bad records. These abnormal people were indeed a bit pitiful. He pretended to mention it carelessly. Lao Dai didn't train many young ones. However, last year, that little guy called Hong Zhu in the royal study seemed to be quite clever. Hong Zhu has already gone to the Eastern Palace. The deputy eunuch is the Emperor's Grace, Eunuch Yao replied carefully. Everyone in the palace knew that Hong Zhu had been chased out of the royal study because Fan Xian had said something in front of the emperor. The rumor was that Hong Zhu had been blinded by money and dared to extend his hand to Sir Fan Jr. for a bribe. Fan Xian's expression darkened slightly. After thinking for a while, he sighed and said, "This is also good. This kind of overly clever person is never suitable to serve the emperor. He doesn't know when to advance or retreat, and he doesn't know when to stop." Too clever? This was clearly derogatory. Eunuch Yao thought to himself that the rumors were indeed true. Hong Zhu didn't usually look stupid, so how did he dare to provoke Sir Fan Jr.? It looked like that kid wouldn't be able to climb out of the palace. After sending off Eunuch Yao, Fan Xian led the third prince to the study. After a moment of silence, he quietly said, Do you understand why? The third prince thought for a while. In the end, he was still young and didn't understand the reason. He helplessly shook his head. It's the end of spring and the beginning of summer. Fan Xian lowered his eyelids slightly and said, "We are about to go to Hangzhou. On the way, I still have to make a trip out. The Jiangnan matter has basically been settled. At most, the palace will keep you by my side for a year, which is near the end of the year. We will definitely return to the capital. When we come out again, it will only be me and not you." "Why?" the third prince asked in surprise. "There's no why." Fan Xian smiled slightly and said, "In the eyes of some people, perhaps I have a strange and unfriendly aura. You're a true prince of royal blood. If you are with me for a long time, I'm afraid you will be infected with some bad habits." "But," the third prince hurriedly said, "following Sir to Jiangnan to learn. This is something Father personally promised." "Father, Emperor," Fan Xian couldn't resist shaking his head. "If the Empress Dowager misses you, her youngest grandson, the Emperor can only summon you back." The third prince fell silent. He knew in his heart that his imperial grandmother was different from other grandmothers. She did not like her youngest grandson very much. Instead, she especially valued the crown prince and his second brother. "In other words," Fan Xian said, "starting from next year, you will be alone in Jingdou, and I cannot always stay by your side." The third prince raised his head. A ruthlessness that did not match appeared on his childish and beautiful face. "Sir, don't worry. I will live well and wait for your return." "You're saying childish things again." Fan Xian smiled and scolded. "By the Emperor's side, who would dare to do anything to you?" He slowly said, "However, starting from now, you must stand out. At least, you must let the officials in court and the soldiers in the military know you and get used to you." "Get used to what?" "Get used to the fact that you're also an upright prince and not a child who only knows how to run his nose," Fan Xian said coldly. "Get used to you is also possible. It's also possible for you to do the same." The third prince had been with Fan Xian for half a year. He had long admired this elder brother to the bone. He felt that being by Fan Xian's side was far more pleasant than the cold atmosphere in the royal palace. At such a young age, he could only believe and was only willing to believe what Fan Xian said. However, he still asked curiously, "Sir, shouldn't you first endure silently? You once said that the tallest tree in the forest will be destroyed by the wind. You are still not a towering tree." Fan Xian smiled and rubbed the third prince's head, although this action was disrespectful. "Since the Emperor has you follow me down to Jiangnan, you can no longer hide. Since you can't hide, then I might as well stand out and stand behind you. Let's see which wind dares to blow against you." The third prince scratched his face, not quite understanding. "I want to send a message to Jingdou through eunuch Yao's mouth." Fan Xian pulled back his hand and slowly closed his eyes. "You are the person I have chosen." The third prince suddenly gathered his courage and said, "Even if the crown prince, in the end, it is still father's choice." Fan Xian didn't open his eyes. He only quietly said, "The eldest princess has chosen your second brother. The Empress Dowager has chosen your brother. Although the Emperor has not chosen, many people have already begun to choose. Why would they care if I am one more? There is no more snow outside the window. I wish everyone good health. I wish my friends in the South all the best. If you want to know what happens next, please log on to www.cmfu.com. There are more chapters. Support the author. Support original reading. Chapter 408. The spring wind did not care about the wind and moon, nor did the summer wind. It was just the damp, clear, or stuffy air that carried on endlessly rubbing itself. However, the people in the air would give rise to appropriate emotions because of the rubbing of heaven and earth. So what if it's clear? Do you think the Qing Emperor will believe your statement? Haidang was wearing a light green robe with 2 large pockets sewn on it. Her hands were in the pockets, as usual. She looked at Fan Xian and spoke with a smile. Fan Xian tilted his head slightly. He knew what she meant. He wanted eunuch Yao to send the scene in Jiangnan back to Jingdou and let everyone in court know that he had chosen the third prince. If it had been in the past, Fan Xian would certainly not have committed such a taboo by taking sides before the emperor made his choice. However, it was different now. The power in Fan Xian's hands was too great. He had to declare to the emperor that he had no interest in that chair. The problem was just as Haidang said. Why should the emperor believe him? Just based on the third prince? After the emperor passed away, if Fan Xian supported the third prince to take the throne, given the power in his hands and the background behind him, he could, at any time, make the third prince a mere figurehead, regent, or something like that. The emperor is healthy and in the prime of his life. Fan Xian lowered his head and quietly said. The matters of the future are too far away. I can't always be a lonely official. Furthermore, he placed the third prince by my side, so I will follow his wishes. As for what consequences will it cause? He narrowed his eyes and looked at the thin lake in front of him and the faint mist on the lake. In a quiet voice, he said, I've been thinking about a problem for a long time. Haidang yawned and covered her mouth. What problem? I also stood out this time because I wanted to put some pressure on the two brothers in the capital, Fan Xian said with a smile. The two brothers he spoke of were the crown prince and the second prince. I really want to force them to do something desperate. Otherwise, if they keep dragging their feet, who knows how tall my mother-in-law is? Is she as tall as a building? He shook his head. I just don't want to wait anymore. Haitang's heart jumped slightly. She turned her face to look at him. You really plan on laying your cards on the table? Fan Xian smiled and said, I haven't finished speaking. I want to force the two brothers to do something desperate. But what about His Majesty? He had the third prince follow me to Jiangnan, so he must have thought that the situation would develop like this in the future. The third prince was also involved, and his attitude was so ambiguous. How could the crown prince feel good? Now that the second prince can't go up or down, he can't just let it go like this. Could it be that our emperor also wants to force his own son to rebel? After clarifying his doubts, the chill in his heart eased a little, and he let out a sigh. Haidang lowered her head and said, even if the imperial clan is heartless, in the end, he is still a father. Is there a need to toy with his own son like this? Fan Xian nodded. That is also what I do not understand. Congratulations, Haidang suddenly said. Fan Xian asked in surprise, what is there to be happy about? Since your thoughts are so similar to your country's emperors, then in the coming year, naturally, you will win, Haidang said softly. Fan Xian thought for a moment, and then quietly said, it looks like you have more confidence in my emperor than I do in him. Because you are a southerner, Haidang said indifferently. Because after you entered the capital, the Qing emperor has always appeared somewhat quiet, so you have not experienced his terror. When he was still the crown prince, he led 3 expeditions to the north. With a remote Qing kingdom, he split the mighty Wei kingdom into pieces and beat all the other countries under heaven until they were as silent as cicadas in winter. Such methods, such terror, if I stand in your position and think about it, naturally I have great confidence in him. The ruler of your country is a great ruler. Haidang very directly praised the foreign emperor. In these 2 years, the lion hasn't been sleeping. He's just narrowing his eyes to digest the food in his stomach. However, if someone really dares to try and touch his position, his eyes will open and he will mercilessly tear the enemy into countless pieces. Fan Xian fell silent. Actually, I understand. That is why I want to do this matter, not him. When all is said and done, you are still a passionate person. Haidang gazed at him with a not-quite-there smile. Although you often like to hide your benevolence under the guise of selfishness, you are still a passionate person. If the Qing emperor finally acts in a rage, blood will flow like rivers. You do not want to see this situation, so you want to do it yourself to suppress the destructive power of this matter to the minimum. Fan Xian lowered his head, tacitly agreeing with this statement. No matter how much hatred he had with the eldest princess of Xinjiang, the crown prince, and the second prince, the eldest princess was, after all, Wan Er's birth mother. That lovely Yiling had also become the second princess. Once the battle over the throne erupted, it would certainly bring disaster to the family. Fan Xian was a cold and emotionless person in many ways, but he did not want thousands of heads to hang on the walls of Jingdo and dirty blood to wet the walls. The second prince, who was very similar to him, smiled so shyly. Could he still smile like that after becoming a human head? If the emperor and he won, what would happen to the Yi family? What would happen to Yi Ling? For Fan Xian, this was a problem. For the emperor, this was not a problem. Thus, Fan Xian strongly hoped to be able to take the initiative in solving this problem, but Haitang quietly said, "You should also understand that you alone cannot solve this problem. Your enemies still have many powers that are beyond what you can handle. Against those people, the Qing Emperor has his own plans. He does not need you to do it for him. In the end, you are only the sharpest sword in his hand, and he is the hand holding the sword." Fan Xian knew she was talking about the Juanshan conference and nodded silently. "There is also the Empress Dowager," Haitang said with a slight smile. Fan Xian found a glimmer of sadness in the smile in her eyes. He couldn't resist muttering, "Both empresses are very troublesome." It was clear that Haitang did not want to continue this unsolvable topic. Her gaze, intentionally or not, landed on the ancient sword at his waist. Wang Qimian sent it. Fan Xian met her gaze and explained, "I heard it was the sword of the last Wei Emperor." Haitang's expression did not change. It was as if she had long known the origins of this sword. In a clear and cold voice, she said, "Be careful not to arouse too much discussion." Fan Xian smiled. "Thank you for the reminder. I had originally thought that not many people would recognize it." Haitang lowered her head. No one knew what she was thinking. A moment later, she faintly said, "It has only been 30 years since the destruction of the Wei Kingdom. Although Shao, In, and Zhuang Mohan, the last spiritual symbols of the Wei Kingdom, have already passed away, it has not been that long. In this world, there are many people who remember the events of that time." Fan Xian didn't know why the girl was acting so strangely. An absurd feeling welled up in his heart. Presently, the world could be said to be peaceful, and everywhere could be said to be prosperous. Who would have thought that just 20 years ago, the world was still a large battlefield? At that time, there were endless battles. Countless people died. One large country was destroyed, and 2 large countries were born. Blood flowed on the green hills, and the yellow waves piled up corpses. Among the hundreds of thousands of white bones, the important figures who now led the way of the world were born. The 2 of them fell silent and stared at the show lake in front of them in a daze. This show lake was not the show lake of Baoyue Brothel in Jingdo. It was the lake behind Baoyue Brothel in Suzhou. Last month, Fan Xizha had sent a letter to the people in Jiangnan to start digging the lake. He had used a number of laborers and forcefully doubled the size of the show lake. Now, if one looked back from Baoyue Brothel, the scenery was even more beautiful than it was then. However, Baoyue Brothel had been cut in half by that strike. At this time, they were still busy repairing it. Thus, Fan Xian and Haitang could only stand coldly by the lake and watch the mist on the surface of the lake gather and disperse and gather again. It was as impermanent as life and the world. "Your brothel is repairing very slowly." Haitang seemed to have inadvertently mentioned this. "I'm embarrassed to use your northern cheese silver in front of you. It's too much." Fan Xian smiled and immediately explained, "There's no rush to repair the building. I brought over some professionals from the capital to carefully examine the sword marks in the building." The so-called professionals were the people from the 2nd and 3rd bureaus. Presently, the broken Baoyue brothel was Yi Liuyun's first crime scene. Fan Xian hoped to be able to dig out some of the great grandmaster's true methods of attack from the sword marks and aura for future use. Haitang said, "I've gone to see." "Oh." Fan Xian's eyes lit up. He knew that this girl's insight and knowledge of martial arts were much higher than his. He thought that she must have discovered something. The 8 pillars were cut down at the same time. Haitang recalled the fine marks in the building and couldn't resist sighing. The other cracks were only caused by sword intent. If you and I wanted to cut down the pillars, we could barely do it, but that kind of control over power, Who knows how many years and months it would take to reach that kind of realm. Fan Xian lowered his head and said, "In your opinion, for such a heaven-shaking strike, how many times can Yi Luyun strike out?" "3." Haitang said straightforwardly. "This is under normal circumstances. If that old man put his life on the line, no one knows what kind of miracle would happen." It was indeed a miracle for a human to be able to demonstrate a method like the might of heaven and earth. "You're really not coming with me?" Fan Xian faced the surface of the lake and let out a deep breath. "There has to be someone left in Suzhou," Haitang said with a slight smile. "Besides, you shamelessly had the 8th Bureau publicize our private affairs. If we really went to Hangzhou, what would I do? Even if you're a shameless person, you have to understand me a little." It was a straightforward hidden bitterness. Although she said it with a smile, it was impossible for Fan Xian to resist. He smiled slightly and said, "Then I'm leaving." Haitang bowed slightly and said in a quiet voice, "I won't see you out." In the early morning in Suzhou, the wind and fog above the lake welcomed the sunlight and quickly dispersed. The young man and woman did not say another word. They naturally parted and walked along the lakeside in different directions. It did not take long to leave Suzhou. Fan Xian had originally prepared to live by West Lake in Hangzhou while he was in Jiangnan. However, because the Ming family matter was unexpectedly thorny and there were many more unexpected stories, he had stayed until now. Knowing that he was going to move to Hangzhou, his subordinates had long prepared everything. Even the girls in Hua Garden, under Cici's lead, had made preparations to move. Fan Xian did not return Hua Garden to the Sol merchant. After all, Haitang still had to stay in Suzhou and keep an eye on the large amounts of silver in the Palace Treasury Transport Company and Zhaoshang Money House. Thus, he had to give the girl a place to live. He had also carefully left behind a few average-looking but efficient serving girls. Naturally, Yang Jumei would not feel heartache for this garden. On the contrary, she was extremely happy. At the farewell banquet, Yang Jimei eagerly sat at the lower end of the table. She didn't hear what the two high-ranking officials were saying. She only felt that her ancestors' graves were emitting green smoke. She was actually able to eat at the same table as the imperial envoy. The meal did not take long. The Jiangnan governor, Xue Qing, the rarely seen inspector, the Suzhou Zhizhou who was currently being investigated by the Overwatch Council, and these officials all came to see Fan Xian off. However, because of the vicious situation in the bamboo shed that day with the dragon raising its head, none of the Jiangnan officials, big or small, dared to give any gifts. However, Xue Qing did not avoid preparing expensive gifts. The weight of the gift list made Fan Xian involuntarily speechless. After the banquet, Fan Xian and Xue Qing walked casually in the garden. Fan Xian smiled and said, "Sir, you spoil me like this. First, I can't afford it. Second, how can I properly lecture these Jiangnan road officials in the future?" His words carried a double meaning. Xue Qing laughingly scolded, "It's not like it's for you. You have to take it even if you don't want to." Fan Xian was puzzled. Xue Qing said in a clear voice, "Half of it is for the young lady of the Lin family. No, it should be Lady Fan. It's her first time in Hangzhou, so she certainly didn't bring enough things with her. This is for her." He continued, "The other half is for my teacher. I have been busy with official business in Suzhou and have been unable to go personally to express my filial piety. I hope Sir Fan Jr. will help me bring this gift." Fan Xian smiled. A few days ago, he had already informed Xue Qing of his upcoming trip to Wuzhou and had written it in a letter to the emperor. Only now did he remember that no matter what, Xue Qing had to prepare a heavy gift. Having thought this through, he didn't say anything more. In a quiet voice, Fan Xian said, "I will be in Hangzhou. If you have any orders, please send a letter." "I wouldn't dare," Xue Qing smiled and said. "You're also the imperial envoy. I wouldn't dare to give orders, but there will always be trouble." Fan Xian casually replied. He knew that Xue Qing had long hoped for him to leave Suzhou, so he didn't point it out. Just as they were about to part, Xue Qing suddenly opened his mouth and asked, "Sir Fan Jr., there is one thing I have not found the answer to." "Sir, please speak," Fan Xian said seriously. Xue Qing was silent for a moment and then said, "Sir, just how old are you this year?" Given his status as the Jiangnan governor, he didn't use conventional greetings. Instead, he used the tone of an elder to ask. Fan Xian chuckled and said, 19. Xueqing paused slightly. On the contrary, it was the truth of the rumors that he didn't dare believe. He couldn't resist shaking his head and smiling bitterly. Indeed, heroes come from the youth. After the imperial envoy left the city, Hua Garden immediately became much quieter. Suzhou, which had long been under the powerful pressure of the Overwatch Council and Fan Xian, seemed to come alive in a day. After confirming that the black carriages from the Fan Manor had left the city gates, the people of Suzhou began to spread the news. Hot tears filled their eyes. The treacherous official had finally left. Some people even began to set off firecrackers. That night, the officials of Jiangnan Road, particularly the Suzhou government, also began to celebrate. They congratulated each other for not having been invited by the Overwatch Council to drink tea. As for the officials who had already fallen, no one gave them another glance. Although Suzhou and Hangzhou were not far apart, it was impossible for Fan Xian to hear the firecrackers of the Suzhou people sending off the plague. Later, although the secret agents of the Overwatch Council had reported it, he had only dismissed it with a laugh. The group of people stayed in the Peng family manor by West Lake in Hangzhou and returned to the time when they first arrived in Jiangnan. Fan Xian's but hadn't even touched the ground when he asked, "Where is the madam?" A subordinate reported, "There seems to be some obstruction. There's also Shazhou." Fan Xian was slightly startled. A wave of unease rose in his heart. After thinking for a moment, he didn't say anything more. Leading the 7 tiger guards, he rode toward Shazhou. Dusk arrived in Shazhou. Because Fan Xian was worried about Wanner, he gave up his usual carriage and rode directly. When he entered Shazhou, he felt as if his entire body was falling apart. The faces of the subordinates and tiger guards behind him were deathly pale. They had almost collapsed from exhaustion on this day's journey. A dozen fine horses broke through the silence of the night in Shazhou and came directly to a manor. This manor had once been Jiangnan Shui Han's branch in Shazhou. Now, it had long been taken over by the Overwatch Council. After some repairs, it had become Fan Xian's private residence in name. Fan Xian flipped off his horse. Ignoring the greetings of his subordinates at the door, he directly charged into the courtyard. Just as he was about to enter the stone steps into the inner residence, he saw a familiar person. It was the wife of the Teng family. Fan Xian furrowed his brows and asked, "What is it, young master?" A glimmer of joy flashed through the eyes of the wife of the Teng family. "Why are you here?" "The mistress is fine. She's just resting in the room." Fan Xian didn't believe her. Logically speaking, Wanner should have arrived in Hangzhou today. She had probably been delayed because something had happened to her body. He hurriedly pushed open the door and entered. Like a gust of wind, he swept to the side of the bed. With a flip of his hand, the wind pushed the door shut tightly. He gazed at the girl lying on the bed and the threat of exhaustion on that familiar and beautiful face. He couldn't resist feeling heartache and said, "Your body isn't good, so walk slower." Lin Wanner gazed at him with a smile and said, "Walk slower, so you'll have more time to be happy." Fan Xian smiled and said, "Where did you get all these witty words from?" As he spoke, his finger had already gently rested on his wife's jade-white wrist and began to feel her pulse. What Fan Xian was most worried about was Wanner's body. After all, she had been infected with a lung disease for a number of years. Although he had carefully taken care of her these 2 years and had the medicine teacher, Fei Jie, personally made, Wanner's body was still weak. He was afraid she wouldn't be able to stand the cold on the road. His finger gently rested on Wanner's wrist. Fan Xian's expression gradually became serious, particularly the feeling of his hand. It made his heart jump slightly. How had Wanner become so thin? "You stopped taking the medicine?" Feeling the abnormality of the pulse, Fan Xian pulled back his finger like he had been electrocuted. He gazed at his wife in shock. His eyes were filled with concern and confusion. Lin Wanner slowly pulled back her hand and gently coughed. She gazed at Fan Xian and spoke calmly with a glimmer of determination and joy. "Yes, I stopped taking the medicine." Before Ro left, she brought Master Ku He to the manor to sit for a while. Master Ku He said that Sir Fei's medicine was too powerful. If Wanner wanted to have children, she had to stop taking the medicine. To be continued. If you want to know what happened after, please log on to www.cmfu.com. More chapters. Support the author. Support original reading. Chapter 409. Hearing Wan Er's words, Fan Xian's face immediately darkened. He immediately remembered that his wife's body was not well. He quickly put on a warm smile and said, "What are you thinking about? Sir Fei is my teacher. He has seen me grow up. When we were married, that medicine was a good medicine that my teacher had painstakingly fished out of Dongi. How could he not understand the principle of being a tyrant? During this year, you've been taking that medicine. Your body is clearly getting better. You can't stop, you silly girl." Lin Wanner smiled slightly. There was a glimmer of tiredness in her smile. In a quiet voice, she said, "Naturally, Sir Fei's medicine is good, but what Master Ku He said," without waiting for his wife to finish, Fan Xian had already said firmly, "Of course, Master Ku He is at the top of the world when it comes to fighting and discussing. But when it comes to treating illnesses and taking medicine, he can't even compare to a finger of my teacher and I. Listen to him. It's better to listen to a sow." Although he was restraining himself, Warner still heard the anger in the depths of his words. Gently pulling on his hand, she comfortingly said, "Don't be angry. Although I've stopped taking the medicine, the imperial doctor has come see me. He said that my old illness has healed. It is just that the qi in my body has been rushing recently, so my body is a bit weak." Fan Xian shook his head and half sat on the bed. Pulling Wanner into his embrace, he gently patted her shoulder and said, "Your body is the most important. Don't listen to what other people say." Wanner leaned into his embrace and was silent for a moment. Slowly she said, "But I really want to have a child." Fan Xian was silent. No one knew what he was thinking. A moment later, he said, "I don't want to be angry at you, but I want you to know that there is nothing to discuss in this matter. As long as your body is good, what does it matter if you have a child or not?" In the present world, not having an heir was considered a great sin. Wanner and Fan Xian had been married for a year and a half, yet there was still no movement in her stomach. This girl always remembered this matter and felt very sad. Hearing Fan Xian's powerful and resonant words at this moment, she couldn't help but be startled for a moment. Wanner's emotions were very complicated. She seemed to be happy, but there was also a faint sadness mixed with a bit of embarrassment. Fan Xian looked at his wife's sad expression in his arms and couldn't help but sigh. He stretched out his finger and gently rubbed between her brows. In a quiet voice, he said, "In this world, there are many idiots who think that not being able to have children is a woman's problem. Actually, let me tell you, whether or not you can have children is a matter between husband and wife. I think it is very likely that I have some kind of disease. What does that have to do with you?" This was a joke meant to comfort Wanner, but Wanner was dumbfounded. She thought that her husband was really thick-skinned to be able to say that word. She had no idea what he was talking about, but she vaguely understood that he was trying to put the blame on her. She couldn't help but roll her eyes. "What nonsense are you talking about? What does it have to do with a man whether or not I can have children?" Fan Xian laughed and said, "Who said it doesn't matter? Why don't you try asking old Yao and old Dai in the palace to give birth to 2 children?" Lin Wanner was startled again. Fan Xian continued to smile and said, "Even the incomparably profound eunuch Hong wouldn't be able to have a child if you asked him to. So, having children is a matter between a man and a woman." Lin Wanner immediately came back to her senses. A blush appeared on her cheeks. She spat and said, "The more you talk, the more ridiculous it is." Fan Xian stopped laughing and said seriously, "Then let's talk about serious things. You have to insist on taking the medicine." Lin Wanna listened and made a sound of acknowledgement, but her eyes flashed. Fan Xian lowered his head to look and couldn't help but sigh in his heart. He knew he would not be able to convince her. Wanner, this girl, was usually a simple and cheerful person. Inside, she was exceptionally intelligent. However, when it came to important matters that involved her and Fan Xian, she was particularly stubborn. The scientific reasoning that Fan Xian spoke of was probably something that even someone as unconventional as Haidang would not believe. Naturally, Wanner was the same. Why must we have children? Fan Xian tenderly held his wife and quietly said, "Look at your childhood life in the palace. Think of how I was exiled to Danzhou as a child. You will know that after we have children, we still have to raise them. If we can't raise them well, we might as well not have had them in the beginning." Lin Wanner lowered her head and pressed her lips together. Very calmly and confidently, she objected, "We are not them. We can raise children well." Fan Xian felt a glimmer of helplessness. "But if it really can't be born because of me, then it's better not to have children. It's not as important as your body." Although Lin Wanner felt warm, she still stubbornly shook her head. "I just want a child." Fan Xian felt a headache coming on and said, "Always so stubborn." Lin Wanner raised her head to look at him. Her long eyelashes gently blinked. "I want to have a child with you. This year, you've been either in northern Qi or Jiangnan. I've been very lonely." Although it was only a part of the reason, it still made Fan Xian feel a deep sense of guilt. He didn't know what to say. The two of them hugged each other quietly. Perhaps it was because she was aroused by the body heat. Wanner began to cough gently again. She didn't want Fan Xian to worry, so she forcefully suppressed it. From Danzhou to Jingdou, before they were married, before he met Wanner in the Qing temple, Fan Xian knew that his wife had been infected with tuberculosis. In today's world, this illness was basically an incurable disease. However, when a young man and woman met, they always had incomparable courage to welcome the future disaster. At the time, he had only forcefully suppressed the faint fear. Fortunately, there was Sir Fei. On the night of the wedding, Sir Fei had hurried back from Dongyi with great difficulty and brought back the strange medicine that specialized in treating tuberculosis. The medicine was called ice smoke. This medicine took a full 4 years of Sir Fei's time. 4 years before the wedding, there were already rumors of a marriage between the Fan and Lin families in the palace. After using so much energy and time, the strange medicine was indeed effective. After the wedding, Wanner persisted in taking it. Each time, she only scraped a small amount from the pill and swallowed it with a medicinal soup. Her body gradually improved, and she no longer coughed. The imperial physicians in the palace all thought that the princess' tuberculosis had already been miraculously cured. But side effects? Vinegar made turtle shell. Fan Xian thought back to the ingredients in the pill. Rehmannia, donkey's gelatin, beeswax, what does this have to do with making a child? He immediately thought of Fei Jie's expression when he spoke on the night of the wedding. After taking the medicine, you are forbidden from sexual intercourse for a month. Naturally, this was a naughty joke. Now, that Fan Xian thought back. He realized that his teacher seemed to have hidden some important information. Later, Fan Xian had always felt it was strange why Sir Fei rarely saw him. It was as if he was hiding from something. Could it be the true side effect of this ice smoke was to harm the patient's reproductive function? Fan Xian sat in the chair and couldn't help but shake his head. As long as Wanner's illness could be cured, as long as her tuberculosis did not come back, as long as she was healthy, was it important whether or not she could make a child? Speaking of his previous life, Fan Xian felt that the most inexplicable scene in that world was the one he would occasionally see on television or in novels. The doctor in the delivery room, full of caution, came out of the delivery room and told the family of the pregnant woman that she had a difficult labor and could only save one. Should they save the adult or the child? Save the adult or the child? Was there need to ask? Fan Xian had always thought this was the stupidest question. It was absolutely stupidest to the extreme. Fan Xian was not an idiot, but old bald donkey. Fan Xian stared coldly at the stone floor in front of him. The evil fire in his eyes burned brightly. Sinisterly, he said, "You big idiot." Deng Ziyu paused. He didn't understand the word idiot, but it was clear that the commissioner was already angry to the point of exploding. He quickly comforted, "Sir, Don't be angry, don't be angry. Fan Xian opened his mouth and cursed loudly. Comma asterisk SS. He slammed his palm down and directly smashed the table beside him into pieces. He cursed sinisterly. That goddamn old bald donkey. What exactly are his intentions? Regardless of whether or not Sir Fei's medicine had side effects, it was truly and greatly beneficial to Wanner's body. After Wanner stopped taking the medicine, her body clearly weakened. Who knew what would happen in the future? Wanner stopped taking the medicine because Kuhi had pointed out this matter. But why would Kuhi do this? Fan Xian did not think that Kuhi was a person who purely bemoaned the state of the universe and pitted the fate of mankind. Whether or not his wife could have a child, he believed that he would not be so attentive. Thinking of how Wanner almost had a relapse of her old illness because of Kuhi's words, Fan Xian's fingers began to tremble. He became angry and found it difficult to suppress the urge to kill. He stood up. His eyes burned with a sinister fire. Staring at Deng Ziyu, he said, "Send an order to Su Wanmao and Xia Qifei. This year, all goods going north, lower their grade by 1. Deng Ziyu made a sound, thinking what exactly had happened. Both sides of the trade with Northern Qi had been very happy. Suddenly making a scene like this seemed to hurt the overall situation. He couldn't resist trying to persuade. Sir, although I don't know what happened, lowering a grade is the same as Northern Qi losing hundreds of thousands of liang of silver. This is too big of a matter." Fan Xian knew that Deng Ziyu was urging him not to harm the public discussion because of a personal grudge. He smiled coldly and said, "I am a person who returns grievances with grievances. Others want to make my family unhappy, so I'll make their country unhappy. Hundreds of thousands of liang of silver in exchange for my wife's coughing for a dozen days is already letting them off easy." Deng Ziyu heard the coldness in Fan Xian's tone and didn't dare to say anything more. Carefully, he asked, "What exactly happened?" Fan Xian did not reply. "Sir, the bald donkey you speak of, what donkey is it?" Fan Xian smiled coldly and said, "It's Northern Qi's Ku He, that hairless donkey." Deng Ziyu was silent. He was shocked, but didn't dare say anything. He thought to himself that the commissioner dared to curse Sigu Jian out in the street. Perhaps it wasn't Sigu Jian. At this time, calling Kuhi an old donkey in his own home didn't seem to be a big deal. Fan Xian continued coldly and said, "Send a letter to Wang Qinian. Tell him to prepare to release the news." "Yes." Deng Ziyu accepted the order and asked, "What specifications?" "When?" "Specifications?" Fan Xian narrowed his eyes. "Within 3 days, let everyone in Northern Qi know a story. Also, let them believe this story. As for when, listen to my instructions." "Yes." If it wasn't for the fact that Ro was currently studying under Ku He, Fan Xian wished he could spread the news of Ku He eating human flesh today. Although he knew that this kind of rumor would not harm Ku He's majestic reputation and would not bring him any real benefits. In other words, now is not the best time to spread the news. However, Fan Xian couldn't help it. Now that he couldn't kill Ku He had to do something to get revenge. Many times, Fan Xian appeared to be a calm and sinister person, but when it came to the people he cared about the most, he would become angry like a lion. Even though he knew he wouldn't get much and would suffer a loss, he still had to roar and protect his territory. Regardless of what Kui thought, one had indeed stopped taking medicine because of his words, so Fan Xian had to make Northern Qi and Kui suffer a loss. Perhaps it was a bit childish, but Fan Xian could still be called a person, probably because of this childishness. Tomorrow morning, I'll take a boat back to my hometown. I'm officially taking a leave of 10 days. I'll be back around the 9th day of the Lunar New Year. If I can write in my hometown, I'll write some. If I can't, I'll seriously entertain myself and celebrate the new year. Here, I wish my dear brothers and sisters a happy new year. I have to go and pack my luggage now. Well, there's still one more chapter left in the 5th volume. After I finish the next chapter, I'll write a summary at the end of the volume. I'll also write a summary of 2007. I'll recall my life last year and the days I read and wrote with everyone. I'll also wish everyone a happy new year, good health, and a happy family. Oh, right, if everyone is afraid of not having a book to read, I'll introduce everyone to Jingguan's new book, Unparalleled Food and Lust. This is something I really, really like. Of course, Jingguan's book doesn't need me to advertise it, but I know some friends might have been scared away by the first 3 chapters and the introduction. This book is written very comfortably. Personally, I think it's much better than The Beast's Blood. At least, the opening chapter is much better. I can't give a detailed evaluation. I can only say that Jingguan is very talented. Of course, I don't know him, so this is not an advertisement. I just want to share something good with everyone. To be continued. If you want to know what happens next, please log on to www.cmfu.com. There are more chapters. Support the author. Support the original reading.